Hey guys, tonight we drift into a world where palace torches flicker against walls painted with gold, and desert wind slips through carved stone like a quiet breath. You're standing in the outer halls of an ancient court, and even though your guide swears you're perfectly safe, you can already tell you probably won't survive this level of royal weirdness without questioning a few life choices. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments so I know where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slip deeper into the palace, sandals tapping softly against polished limestone. It's warm, warmer than you expected, the kind of heat that makes every scent bloom. Lotus, honey, and something earthier, something that curls low in your lungs. The pharaoh's attendants claim it's just incense, but the way they grin suggests you're inhaling the kind of incense that makes stars melt into each other. Egypt isn't medieval, strictly speaking, but the habits you're about to witness cast long, strange shadows over the centuries, influencing herbal traditions that European royals later borrowed shamelessly. You pass mural after mural of gods with falcon heads and sun discs, and you can't help noticing how some of these divine scenes look suspiciously like someone tried to paint a dream on the wall while only half conscious. Mainstream historians love to point out that Egyptian royalty leaned heavily on blue lotus, Nymphea caerulea, a flower known then and now for its pleasantly floaty effects. It appears in tombs, in banquet scenes, even nestled behind the ears of pharaohs who clearly enjoyed showing off their favourite botanical companion. You're told the lotus was a symbol of rebirth, but the mellow buzz it provides might have been an equally strong selling point. You lift a ceremonial cup, its rim cold against your fingertips, and the attendant urges you to breathe the steam rising from the cup's surface. The scent is sweet, almost syrupy, and whispers at the edges of your brain like a lullaby you almost remember. A quirky rumour floats around some fringe scholars, claiming that royal brews sometimes blended the lotus with fermented fruits, basically an ancient smoothie that hits harder than expected. Historians still argue whether this was ceremonial, medicinal, or just a pharaoh's version of a Friday night wind down, but as you sway slightly, you have your own theories brewing. Someone brushes past you, robes rustling, and places a garland of petals around your shoulders. It's soft, delicate, and deeply fragrant. The attendant whispers that high-ranking priests wore similar wreaths during rituals meant to expand perception. You try expanding your perception now, but the only thing expanding is your sympathy for scribes who had to record these visions without laughing. A tiny joke pops into your head about whether official state policy meetings were conducted under the influence. Probably not, but based on some of the architectural choices, a crocodile pool inside a palace, you wouldn't bet against it entirely. You wander through another chamber, eyes adjusting as the lighting shifts to a dreamy amber. The walls glow like they're alive. You catch a glimpse of a golden mask on a pedestal, its serene expression making you wonder if the artist was as relaxed as the subject seemed to be. You run your finger along the edge, smooth, flawless, cool. Somewhere nearby, a musician plucks a harp string, the note trailing off like a sigh. The sound blends with the herbal haze in the air, and the whole palace feels like it's breathing with you. A priest waves a censer that billows with a heavier, thicker smoke. You instinctively lean back, your modern instincts saying, maybe don't inhale that. But your ancient side, the version of you that apparently lives somewhere in your bones, leans closer out of pure curiosity. They tell you it's a sacred blend meant to connect the living with the divine. You find yourself thinking that connecting with the divine might just be a fancy way of saying, feeling real floaty for a bit. A historically grounded part of this moment is that Egyptians used kifi, an aromatic mixture of resins, herbs, and wine. It was a nighttime incense, supposedly calming both the body and the mind. Some recipes read like a medieval sleep aid, and a luxury perfume had a baby. Whether it produced mild psychoactive effects is still a matter of debate, but based on how quickly your shoulders loosen, you're leaning toward maybe. You step toward a balcony where the moonlight spills across the Nile. The water glimmers like a shifting sheet of metal, cool and alive. You grip the railing, breathing in the night air, but even here the lotus scent clings to you like a soft echo. Below, workers guide small boats along the river, their silhouettes calm and steady. For a moment, everything, the palace, The herbs, the murals, feel suspended in time. You blink slowly, and for a heartbeat the moon looks slightly larger than before. Or maybe your eyes are playing tricks on you. You look again. Nope, normal moon. You mentally congratulate yourself for not hallucinating a celestial panic, though imagining an astrologer trying to explain that to a pharaoh makes you snort quietly. Joke number 2 slips into existence. Imagine being the guy who tells the king, "No sir, the moon is not angry at you. You're just vibing a little too hard." Your last few steps of the night bring you to a quiet corner of the palace garden. Water trickles from a stone fountain shaped like a lotus in bloom. You kneel, touch the water, and it reflects your face back at you. Softened, relaxed, maybe a little amused. You hear someone behind you remark that pharaohs believed the lotus helped the soul travel freely during dreams. As you stand, stretching, you think, dreams or not, the plant clearly did something. The scent, the warmth, the quiet hum in your chest. They all blend into a final impression. Ancient royalty knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it with style. Joke number 3 lands gently as you mutter to yourself, "Honestly, with this many herbs around, no wonder they thought cats were divine." You leave the garden, still drifting among petals and starlight, carried onward by the palace air as the journey continues. You step away from the lotus-soaked warmth of that distant palace, and the air shifts. Cooler now, tinged with crushed grapes and damp soil. It feels like you've wandered straight into a vineyard at dawn, a place where the dew clings to leaves like tiny stubborn jewels. You blink once, twice, and the sandy echoes of the Nile fall away, replaced by rolling hills and wooden stakes lined with vines that twist like sleepy snakes. You're definitely not in Egypt anymore. You've drifted into Carolingian territory, where medieval kings didn't just enjoy wine, they practically built entire diplomatic strategies around it. Your boots sink slightly into soft earth as you walk between rows of grapes, the fruit a deep purple that stains your fingers when you touch it. An attendant nearby gives you a look that says, maybe don't snack on the king's produce, but you can already guess that half these grapes will end up in goblets by nightfall. You inhale, and the scent is heady, sweet, tart, and promising trouble. The Carolingians famously took wine seriously. Charlemagne himself ordered the improvement of royal vineyards, treating grapes like tiny liquid soldiers in his imperial arsenal. That's your mainstream historical fact for the night, delivered with the same seriousness he apparently brought to vineyard management. You follow a narrow path toward a manor house sitting proud atop a rise. It's sturdy, built from pale stone and dark timber beams, with banners hanging from its windows that sway softly in the breeze. Inside, the atmosphere is warmer, firelight flickering, servants bustling, and a low hum of conversation filling every corner. You step in quietly, but your presence still earns a few sideways glances. Maybe it's the lotus scent still clinging to your clothes, or maybe these wine-forward nobles just sense when someone hasn't had their first cup yet. A steward approaches, offering a silver goblet brimming with red wine. The moment you take a sip, the flavour blooms across your tongue. Rich, earthy, and surprisingly smooth for something produced in an age when fermentation sometimes involved prayer as much as skill. You glance at the steward, who nods approvingly. The king calls this his thinking wine, he says. You're tempted to joke that your thinking wine is usually just a cup of tea, but here the stakes are higher. These monarchs didn't sip wine to relax after a long day. They used it to seal treaties, soothe tempers, and occasionally forget they were supposed to wake up early. A quirky tidbit that some chroniclers whisper, never very loudly, is that certain Carolingian nobles infused their wine with herbs meant to clarify the mind. Whether those herbs clarified anything is debatable. In your case, the effect is more like a gentle fog settling across your thoughts, softening the room's edges. Somewhere behind you, a minstrel strikes up a tune, the notes wobbling slightly like he's on his second cup already. You stroll deeper into the hall, noticing long wooden tables set for tonight's feast. Plates of bread, cheese, and roasted meats line the centre, but it's the pitchers of wine that dominate. You count 6 of them within your immediate reach, which seems both excessive and somehow perfectly on brand. A nobleman with a reddish beard leans toward you and murmurs that kings often expected their guests to drink heartily as a sign of loyalty. You nod as if this is a completely reasonable social contract and not just an ancient version of peer pressure. Historians still argue whether the Carolingians drank more for ceremony or for stress, the nobleman continues, wiping foam from his cup. You watch as he lifts it again, eyes bright with amusement. Running an empire, you know, takes the edge off. You're not convinced that's how causation works, but you let the moment pass. You're a visitor. He's a man who probably wrestled a boar once for fun. You're on his turf. As the hall fills, you notice the king himself, broad-shouldered, stern-eyed, and wearing a cloak that glitters faintly in the firelight. You follow as he moves to the head table, each stride sure and heavy, as if the entire hall orbits him. When he lifts his goblet, the room quiets instantly. He speaks in a deep rhythm that rolls through the air like a drumbeat. As he toasts alliances, harvests, and vaguely defined prosperity, you sip again, feeling warmth spread through your chest like a soft ember. At some point you drift toward a side chamber where barrels line the walls like rotund sentinels. A cooper is tapping one open, and the aroma rushing out could knock over a small pony. "This one's an experiment," he says proudly. You ask what that means, and he shrugs in the universal gesture of, "We'll know when someone tastes it." Joke number 1 tonight stumbles into your head. If medieval kings had Yelp, half these barrels would be labelled bold notes of regret. Someone hands you another cup, smaller this time mercifully, and encourages you to experience the terroir. You nod sagely, pretending you know what that means in the 8th century. The wine inside is sharper, with a tang that reminds you of cherries and distant thunderstorms. You exhale slowly, appreciating how the flavour lingers, stubborn and full of personality. A scribe nearby mutters that Charlemagne once attempted to regulate vineyard maintenance personally, requiring standards so specific they bordered on obsessive. You picture him marching through rows of grapes, cape fluttering, pointing out which vines needed trimming, and you can't help laughing softly. Joke number 2, sparkles. Imagine being the intern who has to explain to the emperor why the grapes are underperforming. The feast reaches a crescendo when musicians swarm in, their instruments clattering softly as they take positions. The king signals for more wine to be poured, and suddenly the hall is awash with sound, lutes, drums, voices rising like warm air. You catch yourself swaying gently, not entirely sure whether it's the music or the wine or the way the firelight softens everything into a golden haze. You wander back toward the vineyard outside, craving fresh air. The night is cool, the moon full and gentle, casting long shadows across the vines. You walk between them again, fingertips brushing leaves still warm from the day. For a moment, everything is still. You listen to crickets, distant laughter, and your own breath steadying. This is the side of royal wine culture they never paint in manuscripts. The quiet exhale after the revelry, the calm that settles when the politics pause. Joke number 3 slides in as you whisper, honestly, with this much wine in circulation, half the diplomacy back then must have been, let's revisit this when we're sober. You continue walking, letting the hills cradle you in soft curves, your path illuminated by moonlight, and the lingering warmth of Carolingian wine guiding your steps into the next chapter of this drifting, indulgent journey. You leave the cool whisper of Carolingian vineyards behind, and the world tilts again, sliding like silk into something richer, denser, and far more perfumed. The ground beneath your feet turns to polished marble veined with gold. Candles flicker from enormous brass chandeliers, their flames shivering in the slightest draughts like gossiping courtiers. You've drifted straight into Byzantium, where emperors wore purple thread, streets sparkled with mosaics, and the palace physicians had a well-documented fondness for poppy-based remedies that sometimes wandered out of the strictly medicinal category. You inhale, expecting plain smoke or incense, but the air here is layered, sweet, resinous, touched with something faintly numbing. You follow the scent into a hallway lined with mosaics that shimmer like galaxies trapped inside stone. Tiny tesserae, reds, blues, greens, create scenes of angels, saints, and emperors, each watching you with unblinking eyes. The Byzantines didn't do subtle. They crafted art with the same energy they brought to court politics, intense, dramatic, and absolutely ready to ruin someone's day. A servant glides toward you, offering a small clay cup. Steam curls upward in delicate ribbons. For clarity, he says, which is either a translation error or a very confident marketing tagline. You sip and warmth spreads from the tip of your tongue all the way to your ears. The flavour is earthy, bitter, and oddly compelling. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a little voice mutters, "Oh great, we're doing poppy tea now." Mainstream historians confirm that Byzantine physicians used opium regularly, especially in the form of meconium, a mild poppy extract favoured as a sedative. It soothed pain, calmed nerves, and probably made more than one imperial council meeting feel like it lasted approximately 19 years. You roll the liquid around in your mouth, imagining all the emperors who sat on golden thrones drifting through state affairs with their eyelids half lowered. You wander onward into the Chrysotriklinos, the golden reception hall, where the mosaics intensify into full sensory overwhelm. Gold tiles catch the candlelight and fling it back at you in scattered, blinking shards. The room hums with activity. Courtiers talk in low voices, their silk robes dragging softly across the marble floor. You weave between them, trying to look like you belong, even as the residual buzz from your cup makes everything feel a little softer, a little more dramatic. In a corner, a physician in a dark blue robe grinds something against a stone mortar. The mixture smells faintly floral, faintly medicinal, and very faintly like something that would absolutely require a prescription today. When he notices you staring, he lifts the pestle in greeting. "A remedy for sleeplessness," he says, "and for many other things." He doesn't elaborate, which is deeply on brand. A quirky fact scholars note is that Byzantine medical texts sometimes recommended opium mixtures not only for pain but for melancholy of unknown origin, which sounds suspiciously like medieval burnout. As you move closer to the emperor's throne room, a hush falls over the corridor. Guards in lamella armour stand rigid, their helmets shaped like smooth domes that gleam beneath torchlight. You're impressed, and also slightly intimidated, by how little they move. You're not convinced they even breathe. Inside, the emperor sits beneath a canopy of purple silk, a colour so rare and expensive that wearing it without permission could cost a person their life. His eyes, sharp, calculating, drift over the assembly. His posture is perfect. His fingers tap lightly on the armrest, as though keeping time with some internal rhythm only he can hear. You wonder whether he's had a cup of the palace's medicinal brew tonight. Given the stress levels of running a super empire positioned between east and west, you wouldn't blame him. A historian pops into your memory whispering, historians still argue whether Byzantine emperors personally partook in opium or simply endorsed its medical use. Standing here, watching the emperor's serene, half-lidded expression, you quietly cast your vote. An attendant offers you another cup, because apparently Byzantium is committed to keeping your bloodstream interesting. You decline this one politely, concerned your legs may float off without you. Joke number 1 slips into place. At this rate, you're about 3 sips away from declaring yourself Emperor of the Couch. You drift toward the edge of the hall, where musicians tune their lyres. Their notes vibrate through the air like threads of gold, weaving into conversations, footfalls, and the soft swish of silk. One musician looks up at you and says, "Music guides the mind toward truth." You nod, though the last time music guided your mind, it led you to buy novelty socks at 2 a.m. Nearby, a scholar reads from a manuscript, thin pages covered in tight, elegant script. He gestures passionately, describing how poppy-based remedies allowed surgeons to perform complex procedures with minimal discomfort to their patients. You catch a glimpse of an illustration, a physician holding a cup to a patient's lips while another prepares surgical tools. The historian in your head whispers, "This was cutting-edge medicine," while the modern part of you mutters, "Yeah, cutting edge right before cutting into someone's actual edge." You step onto a balcony overlooking Constantinople at night. The city stretches outward in glittering waves, homes lit by oil lamps, churches crowned with domes, and the distant silhouette of the hippodrome. Below, the Bosporus glimmers like a ribbon of black silk. You breathe in the cool air, letting your senses reset. But even out here, the faint scent of the palace's herbal concoctions lingers on your clothes like a clingy X. A courtier joins you, leaning on the railing. "Strange thing about our remedies," he says, watching ships drift across the water. "They help the body and unmoor the mind. Sometimes that's useful. Sometimes," he pauses, "less so." You sense personal experience behind that statement. Joke number 2 strolls in lazily. If clarity were the goal, Byzantium probably shouldn't have mixed medicine, politics, and incense that smells like a warm nap. The courtier sighs and wanders back inside, leaving you alone with the city's cool breath on your face. You close your eyes, letting the sounds rise, distant bells splashing water, the muted chatter from inside. The mixture of warmth from the tea and crisp night air leaves you in a suspended moment, halfway between alert and dreamlike. You step back into the Golden Hall just in time to see two nobles debating passionately over something clearly vital, judging by their gestures, yet entirely incomprehensible to you. Their animated conversation, and the slight glazed look in their eyes, delivers joke number 3. The only real mystery here is whether they're arguing about theology or pastries. As you slip out of the hall, the mosaics behind you shimmer once more. Angels, emperors and saints watching silently, their colours glowing like embers. You walk onward, drifting through marble and lamplight, carrying the faint echo of poppy-scented air as your journey slides gently toward its next strange royal indulgence. You drift out of the gilded haze of Byzantium, and the marble coolness dissolves into something drier, dustier, and humming softly with desert wind. Sand crunches beneath your boots. A faint scent, earthy, smoky, a touch sweet, floats on the air like a whispered invitation. You blink, and the world sharpens into the unmistakable contours of a crusader encampment somewhere in the Levant. Tents ripple like parchment caught in the breeze, torches sputter, and horses snort impatiently in the background. You adjust your cloak, when did you even get a cloak, and wander forward, already sensing that the herbal curiosity of these crusader lords might get just a little out of hand. You pass rows of soldiers sharpening spears and polishing helmets. Their chatter is low, edged with exhaustion. The Crusades weren't exactly wellness retreats. Still, the nobles here, the ones lounging near oil lamps with ornate goblets, seem to have discovered a local pastime that helps them contemplate strategy, which is medieval for unwind before doing something questionably wise. The scent grows stronger as you follow it toward a cluster of richly adorned tents. The nobles sit in a loose circle, and on the small table between them rests a dark green resin wrapped in cloth. You recognize the resin from your high school world history textbook, though your teacher definitely didn't describe it this way. Hashish, a concentrated form of cannabis that travelled across the Middle East long before crusader boots stomped into these sands. There's your mainstream historical fact. Certain chroniclers noted that European crusaders encountered hashish during their campaigns, sometimes mistaking it for medicine, sometimes for magic, and occasionally for the devil's spinach brownie. Not an actual quote, but the energy was there. One knight waves you over with a grin far too relaxed for someone wearing chainmail. "Sit," he says, patting the sand beside him. "The locals say this helps you see clearly." You aren't sure if he means strategically or cosmically. With crusaders, it's often hard to tell. You lower yourself cautiously as another noble scrapes a tiny piece of the resin into a brazier. The smoke curls upward, slow and hypnotic like it's doing a rehearsed dance routine. Within moments, the air smells richer, warm, woody, with a sweetness that clings to your tongue even though you haven't tasted anything. You cough once, trying to wave it away, but the knight laughs. "First time?" he asks. You consider explaining that your resume now includes lotus palaces and Byzantine poppy tea, but decide he's not ready for that conversation. A fringe anecdote wafts into your memory. Some crusaders wrote home about herbal temptations and strange Eastern comforts, though historians debate whether these accounts were wildly exaggerated, deeply judgmental, or secretly jealous. The knight beside you tosses another pinch of resin into the brazier and sighs happily. Helps with the heat, he claims, which is objectively untrue but very on brand. You watch as one noble begins describing a vision he had the previous night, something about a lion offering him advice on battlefield maneuvers. You try not to stare. Another noble nods sagely, as though lions casually offer strategic coaching all the time. Historians still argue whether crusader lords genuinely experimented with hashish, or whether later storytellers exaggerated their encounters to make them seem naive. Looking at this cluster of mellow armoured men, you lean towards some version of both. You catch a desert breeze, dry and cool, brushing past your face like a whispered reminder to hydrate. Joke number 1 floats into your mind. Nothing says tactical genius like being slightly baked in chainmail under the Middle Eastern sun. You keep this thought to yourself for your own safety. A squire appears with a tray of dried fruit and flatbread. Snacks apparently transcend all cultures. You accept a small piece of fig. the sweetness grounding you as the haze thickens around the group. The fire crackles. Someone starts humming. You blink slowly, the world momentarily smoothed into softer edges. The nobles begin discussing philosophy, astronomy, and whether the stars look different in Jerusalem than they did in France. One of them insists they definitely do. You suspect he is influenced by the brazier. You drift to the edge of the tent and peek outside. The night sky is vast, glittering, and profoundly indifferent to human quests. A few steps away, a young knight tries to recite scripture but keeps forgetting the next line, dissolving into giggles. You shake your head, amused, as joke number 2 strolls out of your thoughts. Imagine marching thousands of miles for a holy mission, only to end up vibing with the stars like a freshman at a music festival. A hooded figure approaches, a local guide hired by the Crusaders. He glances at the tent, rolls his eyes and mutters, "They think it gives them wisdom. Mostly it gives them naps." He's not wrong. One noble is already lying on his side, staring dreamily at the tent ceiling, as though receiving divine visions or watching imaginary clouds drift by. The guide gently corrects a few of the more fantastical rumours floating around the camp. No, hashish does not let you speak with angels. No, it does not make you immune to arrows. Yes, some warriors in the region have used it ceremonially, but usually not with this level of enthusiasm. The Crusaders nod solemnly and immediately ignore him. Another noble insists on telling you a story about meeting an assassin monk who used hashish to achieve supernatural bravery. The guide groans audibly. Historians widely dispute the famous legend that the Nizari Ismaili assassins used hashish to recruit and indoctrinate members, though medieval Europeans clung to this myth like it was their favourite bedtime story. You picture a medieval game of telephone spiralling wildly out of control and suppress a laugh. The brazier crackles again. Someone brings out a lute. The knight beside you leans back, staring at the sky through the tent flap. "You ever think," he says slowly, "that we're all just grains of sand on God's great beach?" Joke number 3 pops in before you can stop it. Great. The existential phase has begun. Next, someone's going to try hugging a camel. The firelight fades to a deep orange glow. Voices soften. The resin smoke thins, drifting upward like a sleepy spirit. One by one, the nobles settle onto blankets, mumbling half-formed thoughts about destiny, home, and how delicious figs are. You stand, brushing sand off your cloak, and step outside into the cool night. The stars blaze brilliantly overhead, steady, sharp, unfiltered by haze or palace smoke. You breathe deeply, clearing your head. Behind you, the tent hums with lazy conversation, the warm scent of hashish curling outward like a gentle reminder of how far cultures collide and blend when people wander too far from home. You walk onward, letting the desert wind guide your steps, as the Crusader encampment slowly fades into darkness and your journey drifts toward its next royal indulgence. You leave the Crusader tent behind, letting the desert wind whisk away the last sweet traces of resin. The sands dim, cool, fold into shadow, and then the world shifts with a soft grunt of wooden beams, the scratch of wool, the crackle of fire. You blink and suddenly you're standing inside an Anglo-Saxon longhouse, where smoke rises in lazy spirals toward a dark, soot-kissed roof, and the scent of roasted meat blends perfectly with something far more fermented. Your boots sink into rushes scattered across the packed earth floor. The warmth hits you immediately. Fire pit heat, thick air, and the unmistakable aroma of ale that could probably dent a shield if poured with enough enthusiasm. Anglo-Saxon nobles didn't just like ale, they worshipped the stuff. Not literally, though. Given how many poetic verses survive about drinking horns, the line was blurry. There's your mainstream historical fact. Ale played a central role in early medieval English society. Ritual, hospitality, politics, even lawmaking. If you wanted influence, you didn't schedule a meeting. You poured a horn. A housecarl nods you inside, his beard braided and gleaming with what might be oils or might be leftover soup. You don't ask. You follow him past benches crowded with nobles, warriors, scribes, and at least one person who looks like they wandered in by accident and decided to stay for the snacks. Everyone here holds a horn, clay mug, or wooden cup, all filled with ale so strong you swear the fumes alone could lift you off your feet. You take a tentative sip from a horn offered by a smiling woman in embroidered wool. The liquid is warm, thick, slightly sweet, and surprisingly smooth, like a cross between bread, honey, and mild chaos. It hits your tongue and then your bloodstream in under 2 seconds. A warrior claps you on the back hard enough to rearrange your spine and laughs. Good, yes? Brewed this morning. You can't help wondering if this morning means still fermenting. You slide onto a bench, absorbing the scene. Firelight dancing across shields hanging on the walls, dogs curled under tables hoping for scraps, storytellers reciting tales of ancient heroes who definitely never skipped leg day. Everyone's cheeks glow warm, laughter bursts constantly, and the ale, always the ale, flows faster than the river outside. But not all is simple merriment. A scribe sitting beside you leans in, whispering conspiratorially, "Some nobles add herbs, for clarity." You bite your tongue to avoid laughing. You've heard this line before. From Byzantium, from Crusaders, from... Okay, apparently clarity is history's favourite marketing term for this might hit harder than expected. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. Archaeological finds suggest some ale may have been brewed with wild botanicals, bog myrtle, heather, yarrow, plants that could enhance flavour and produce mild psychoactive effects. The scribe nods knowingly as if reading your thoughts. King so-and-so swears by the heather blend, he murmurs, though he doesn't specify which king. Probably because several of them had similar reputations for, shall we say, enthusiastic experimentation. You take another sip, feeling its warmth settle into your bones, loosening your shoulders. The warrior across from you slams his mug on the table and launches into a debate about whether dragons ever existed. His friend counters passionately. Historians still argue whether Anglo-Saxon dragon tales were metaphors or memories of older myths, someone yells. You decide to stay out of it because you're pretty sure joining this debate requires at least 3 more mugs. You wander toward the fire pit, letting the crackle of burning logs steady your thoughts. The heat washes over your face. Sparks swirl upward like tiny fireflies trapped in a slow-motion dance. A musician plucks a lyre nearby, the soft notes weaving beautifully into the chatter. Someone presses another mug into your hands, this one darker, richer, with a smell like roasted grain and campfire stories. You take a sip and instantly you're pretty sure this brew qualifies as a controlled substance in several modern countries. Joke number 1 drifts in gently. At this point you suspect Anglo-Saxon nobles negotiated treaties based on who could stay upright longest. A noblewoman stands and raises her horn. The room quiets. Her voice carries with authority and rhythm, reciting a poem, half prayer, half boast. The ale heightens the atmosphere, softening some edges, exaggerating others. You listen, entranced, until she finishes with a sharp lift of her chin. The room erupts in cheers. Someone behind you belches, loudly enough to compromise structural integrity, but no one seems bothered. You take a few steps toward the far end of the hall, where a wooden chest sits open. Inside are carved drinking horns, some plain, some ornate, some so large they could double as musical instruments. A warrior picks up one etched with knotwork and hands it to you. "This one," he says proudly. "My uncle says it belonged to a king." You're about to return it when he shrugs. Or a shepherd. Hard to know. You nod sympathetically. Early medieval record-keeping was not exactly meticulous. You glance toward the side wall where the mead bench stands. Though this section is about ale, the Anglo-Saxons blurred lines constantly. Honey wine, grain ale, herbal mixtures. It all flowed together. A brewer stirs a massive vat with a wooden paddle taller than you. Steam rises in fragrant clouds. "Fermentation," he says, "is a gift from the gods." You resist the urge to reply that so is moderation. Joke number 2 leaps onto your tongue before you can stop it. If this is the mild batch, the strong one probably requires a legal waiver. As the evening deepens, the longhouse hums with stories. Beowulf retellings, local gossip, wildly exaggerated hunting tales. The ale erases inhibitions so smoothly you hardly notice the shift. People who earlier held themselves stiffly now lean in close, finishing each other's jokes. The scribe beside you admits he once wrote an entire charter upside down by accident. The warriors howl with laughter. A bard steps forward and begins a tale about giants in the north. The audience leans in, captivated. Whether it's the story or the ale guiding their imaginations, you can't tell. The fire flickers, casting shadows that dance like spirits across the carved beams above. For a moment, it feels like time itself bends around the hall, wrapping you in centuries-old warmth. You rise and step outside for air. Night settles cool on your skin. Thatched roofs stretch across the village like sleeping animals. Smoke curls from chimneys into a sky studded with cold, bright stars. You breathe deeply, letting the crispness cut through the lingering haze. Joke number 3 materializes as you exhale. Honestly, with ale this potent, it's a miracle anyone in this era got around to inventing literacy. You linger a moment longer, listening to the muffled laughter inside, the clang of a dropped mug, the rhythmic pulse of that lyre. The doorway behind you glows with amber light, warm and inviting. These nobles drank to celebrate, to bond, to forget, sometimes to excess, often with joy, always with the understanding that ale carried not just flavour but fellowship. You turn back toward the longhouse, letting the warmth pull you in once more, as your journey drifts forward, deeper into the medieval night. You step back inside the Anglo-Saxon longhouse, just long enough for the warmth to cling to your cloak, and then everything tilts again. The scent of grain ale fading, the firelight thinning, replaced by a colder, sharper world. A wet wind snaps against your face. Salt stings your lips. Wooden planks creak beneath your boots. When you look down, you're standing on the deck of a longship cutting through steel-grey waves, its carved dragon prow snarling into the spray. The sky overhead churns with clouds the colour of hammered iron. Welcome to the Norse world, where mead isn't just a drink, it's a sacred rite, a social glue, and occasionally the reason someone wakes up wearing antlers and no memory of why. A royal figure stands near the mast. A Norse king or jarl, broad-shouldered, fur-cloaked, and radiating the kind of confidence only achievable through a lifetime of conquest and regular mead consumption. A servant offers him a horn carved from ivory, filled to the brim with honey wine so fragrant you can smell it over the ocean wind. He takes a deep drink, wipes his beard, and passes the horn to you with a grin. You hesitate only for politeness' sake. The moment the mead touches your tongue, warmth unfurls through your chest. It's sweet, sunshine trapped in honey, yet strong enough to make your vision wobble for a moment. The Norse didn't play around. There's your mainstream historical fact. Scandinavian royals considered mead a drink of the gods, especially Odin, who was said to have stolen the magical mead of poetry. Every feast, oath, wedding, and victory involved mead. You take a deeper sip and immediately understand why these traditions endured. The longship rocks as you make your way toward the stern, where warriors shield their faces from the spray. They're singing, loudly, enthusiastically, and in what you hope is a key recognized by human ears. The Jarl joins in, slapping your back so hard your soul briefly leaves your body. The mead amplifies everything. The cold, the camaraderie, the story shouted over the wind. A barrel near your feet sloshes. Its lid is slightly cracked open, revealing honeycomb floating in golden liquid. A brewer crouches nearby, muttering about the batch being a little wild. You don't ask what that means. A quirky tidbit, you recall. Some Norse brews were infused with herbs, bog myrtle again, heather, spruce tips. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes because someone innocently tossed plants into a fermentation vat and discovered unexpected effects. The brewer hands you a small cup. You take a sniff and decide it smells like ambition mixed with poor decision-making. The Jarl calls for landfall soon, gesturing toward a fjord materializing through the fog, cliffs rising like giant stone ribs from the sea. You clutch the ship's railing, letting cold spray slap your cheeks awake. The mead's warmth pools inside you like a tiny hearth. The combination is dizzying but strangely pleasant. Historians still argue whether Norse rulers used mead primarily for ritual or recreation, the Jarl shouts over the wind. You consider the sloshing barrels, the lively singing, and the fact that two warriors are attempting an impromptu dance despite the ship's aggressive tilting, and you think, why not both? When you finally reach shore, the world becomes a riot of sound. The royal hall rises ahead, massive, timber-built, carved with dragons, wolves, and knots that twist into illusions when the torchlight flickers. Snow crunches underfoot. Smoke drifts from the roof hole, carrying aromas of roasted lamb, pine resin, and, of course, mead. Inside, warmth floods you instantly. The hall glows amber from dozens of torches. Shields line the walls, furs cover benches. At the far end, the high seat stands beneath carved ravens whose wooden eyes glitter ominously. The Jarl takes his place and gestures for the feast to begin. A horn the size of your forearm is pressed into your hands. This batch of mead is richer, thicker, almost syrupy. It has notes of honey, spice, and something floral that reminds you faintly of summer fields. The mead hits harder here, maybe because the air is warm, or maybe because someone added an herb they found during a walk and decided, sure, why not? The gods will sort it out. Joke number 1 ambles casually into your mind. With the amount of experimental mead these royals drank, it's shocking the sagas don't include more lines like, and then Bjorn accidentally talked to a tree for 40 minutes. The skald begins reciting poetry, his voice booming, rhythmic, carrying centuries of tradition. The mead seems to resonate with every syllable, loosening tongues, strengthening laughter, and softening memories just enough to turn every story into a legend. You lean back, feeling the wooden bench beneath you, the heat across your face, the rising tide of joyful noise. A royal advisor approaches, a sharp-eyed woman wearing a cloak fastened with silver. She explains that mead wasn't merely intoxicating, it doubled as a ceremonial seal. Oaths sworn over mead was sacred, breaking one risked divine wrath and communal outrage. You nod solemnly, careful not to slosh your drink. The advisor nods back, approving your seriousness, unaware that your current concentration level is held together by honey, willpower, and Nordic friendship. A few warriors begin slamming their mugs on the table in unison. Another wrestles a friend onto a fur rug, laughing hysterically. A third attempts to teach you a drinking song that has approximately 18 verses and no discernible melody. Somewhere across the hall, someone knocks over a brazier and immediately blames the gods. Joke number 2 slips out as you murmur to yourself. Mead may be the only beverage capable of making a room full of armed people increasingly confident about their choreography. The feast grows louder, platters of roasted boar appear, mead flows faster. A noble claims he once drank enough honey wine to hear Odin personally critique his life choices. No one questions this. You wander outside for a moment, letting cold air nip at your face. The sky above is a velvet dome embroidered with stars so bright they look carved into the night itself. You hear the sea in the distance and the muffled thrum of the hall behind you, a heartbeat powered by honey and myth. You exhale, breath curling into ghostly threads. Joke number 3 settles softly. With this much mead, it's entirely possible some Norse visions were less divine revelation and more accidentally mixed the wrong herbs again. When you step back inside, the Jarl lifts his horn toward you. Drink, he says warmly, for memory and for forgetting. The duality resonates strangely. Mead, after all, helped warriors steady their courage, but also helped royals soften the burdens of rule. The hall glows, thrums, breathes. You take your seat once more, letting the warmth seep into your bones as your journey gently prepares to drift deeper into medieval indulgence. You let the Norse hall fade behind you, the roaring laughter, the honey-thick mead, the clatter of shields. The warmth dissolves, the air cools, and then shifts again. Suddenly warm, but in a completely different way. A soft Mediterranean breeze brushes your face. Orange blossoms drift on the wind like tiny lanterns. When you open your eyes, you're walking through a courtyard tiled with blue and white mosaics, the kind that sparkle even in the shade. Somewhere nearby, a fountain murmurs quietly to itself. You've arrived in medieval Iberia, land of layered cultures, warm sunlight, and royal perfume obsessions so intense they turned entire palaces into aromatherapy chambers. Your boots tap against polished stone as you move beneath archways carved with intricate lattice designs. The air smells delicious, citrus peel, saffron, jasmine, maybe a hint of mint. You take a deeper breath, and the scent settles into your lungs with a gentle hum. The Andalusi courts were famous for this kind of fragrance alchemy. There's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval Iberian royalty, especially in Islamic Al-Andalus, used perfumes not just for luxury, but for health, ritual, and mood enhancement. Some monarchs sponsored entire perfumer guilds to perfect aromatic blends for the palace. A servant glides past you holding a silver censer shaped like a pomegranate. Perfumed smoke spills upward in thin curls that glow gold in the slanted sunlight. You follow her into a room with tall arched windows overlooking an orchard. Inside, nobles recline on cushions embroidered with silk and metallic thread. Their robes shimmer. Their hair glints with oil. Most importantly, the air is thick with scent. Not oppressive, but rich, layered, almost intoxicating. A noblewoman hands you a small vial. "This," she says softly, "is for clarity." You nearly laugh. It seems every medieval era believes its favourite substance is the key to clarity. But you sniff the vial anyway. The scent rushes into your senses like a warm wave. Rose, orange blossom, and something deeper, darker, maybe ambergris. It's calming. It's uplifting. It's surprisingly effective. You dab a bit on your wrist, and wow! The room seems to glow a little brighter. A court physician enters, adjusting his belt pouch filled with herbs and spices. He begins lecturing a nearby prince about the importance of balancing the humours through scent. The physician lists classic ingredients: myrrh, sandalwood, musk, explaining which uplift the spirit and which soothe anxiety. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your memory. Some Iberian monarchs reportedly believed certain perfumes sharpened intelligence, especially those containing mint or rosemary. You glance around and, sure enough, bowls of fresh rosemary sprigs rest on nearly every table, as if the whole palace collectively decided it needed a mental boost. The prince lifts a small burner filled with resinous pellets and inhales deeply. His eyes flutter closed. When he opens them, he looks vaguely enlightened, or maybe just relaxed. A scholar beside you whispers, "Historians still argue whether these perfumes had psychoactive effects, or whether the environment itself, sunlight, luxury, expectation, created the sensation. Considering how floaty your own thoughts feel right now, you think, probably both." A servant leads you into the orchard. Sunlight warms your shoulders. The trees around you are heavy with oranges, lemons, and citrons. Bees buzz lazily. You pluck a leaf and rub it between your fingers. The scent bursts out green and bright. A perfumer kneels under one of the trees, gathering flowers into a woven basket. "For distillation," he explains. His voice is gentle, reverent. You watch as he places blossoms carefully, almost ceremonially. Then he beckons you toward a small outbuilding, the palace perfumery. Inside, the air is even more fragrant. Copper alembics, distillation stills, gleam in the light filtering through the lattice windows. Steam puffs softly from narrow spouts. Bowls of crushed blossoms sit on polished tables. The perfumer explains that Iberian courts were masters of distillation long before other parts of Europe caught up. You nod as though this is normal, even though you're low-key impressed by their medieval chemistry lab. He lifts a stopper from a jar and offers it for you to smell. The scent hits you instantly. Sharp, sweet, intoxicating. "Citrus attar," he says. "Her Majesty's favourite for focus." You're not sure if it's the citrus or the confidence of the claim, but your thoughts feel suddenly crisp. You could probably fill out tax forms right now with startling accuracy. Joke number 1 sneaks in. If modern productivity influencers sold scent this effective, half the internet would buy diffuser pyramids by tomorrow morning. The perfumer leads you into a garden bath area, a royal hammam. Steam billows from a warm pool. The air smells of eucalyptus and crushed mint. Nobles recline on benches while attendants massage fragrant oils into their skin. One noble swears that scented steam improves memory. Another claims it helps him dream more vividly. Honestly, you believe both of them based on the way the steam curls sensually around your face. You dip a hand into the pool. The water is perfect. A court poet sits nearby, scribbling lines about perfumed winds carrying thoughts upward. You roll your eyes affectionately. You've had enough experience tonight to know he probably is feeling something uplifted. As you wander deeper into the palace, you notice bowls of potpourri on pedestals, oil lamps suspended from chains, and tapestries woven with botanical patterns. Everything is designed to surround, soothe, and slightly elevate your senses. Even the air seems to hum with fragrance. A royal advisor approaches, offering a small cup of spiced wine. You hesitate. Memories of Carolingian vineyards surface. But this one smells gentler, infused with cinnamon and rosewater. You sip. Warmth spreads through you, but without the fog of stronger drinks. For the nerves, the advisor says. You're starting to suspect everything here is for something. Joke number 2 strolls in. At this point, you wouldn't be surprised if someone handed you perfumed air and said it improves your posture. You enter the throne room, where the monarch sits among towering columns carved with vines. Perfumed oil warms on bronze dishes near the dais. Courtiers bow. A gentle wind from hidden windows carries scents through the chamber in delicate waves. When the monarch addresses the court, their voice rings clear and confident, but their shoulders also look very relaxed, as if living inside a giant aromatic diffuser turns ruling into a spa day. You drift toward an open balcony. The sun has begun to set, painting the sky orange and pink. The orchard below glows gold. Perfume lingers on your clothes, your skin, even your hair. The breeze lifts it, blending it with salt from the distant sea. Joke number 3 lands softly. Honestly, with aromas this potent, half the palace could skip meals and just inhale dinner. As twilight deepens, the palace lamps flicker to life. The scented air hums. The courtyard murmurs. You breathe deeply, letting the blend of citrus and jasmine cradle your senses. You step away from the balcony and back into the warren of perfumed chambers, feeling lighter, calmer, your thoughts drifting sweetly forward as your journey carries you toward its next royal indulgence. You let the Iberian perfumes trail behind you like a lingering dream, citrus, jasmine, sandalwood, and the warm Mediterranean night folds into something cooler, damper, and wrapped in an English mist that clings to your cloak like an affectionate cat. Cobblestones appear under your boots, slick with evening dew. The low hum of a hearth fire filters through shuttered windows. Somewhere in the distance a church bell tolls softly. You've drifted into Plantagenet, England, where royalty swore by their remedies, their charms, their astrologers, and perhaps most fondly of all, their poppy-infused teas. You follow the glow of torch sconces up a stone staircase. The air grows warmer as you reach the upper chambers of a manor house, a place full of carved oak, heavy tapestries, and that distinct medieval smell of wool, rushes, and, we don't know what soap is yet. Servants move silently through the corridor, carrying trays draped in linen. Steam rises from one cup on a tray, rich, earthy, slightly sweet, unmistakably herbal. You catch a whiff, that soft, soporific poppy profile drifting like a lullaby. There's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval English nobility relied heavily on medicinal teas made from poppy, valerian, and other soporific herbs. Poppy especially was used to ease pain and calm nerves, though the boundary between medicine and let's make things feel a little softer tonight was, well, flexible. A chamberlain nods for you to follow him through a carved wooden door. Inside, the room glows with a gentle amber light from a brazier. A noblewoman reclines on a padded bench, her gown shimmering with embroidered vines. Before her sits a table scattered with dried petals, spices, and little cloth packets tied with string. She stirs a small pot over the brazier, humming softly as fragrant steam curls into intricate loops. She beckons you closer. Sit, she says, her voice soft but firm, like someone who has issued many invitations that aren't really optional. You look weary. You want to protest, but honestly, after longhouses, longships, and perfumed courts, she has a point. She pours you a cup from a ceramic pot glazed in greens and browns. The steam warms your face. The scent is earthy with a floral undercurrent. Poppy and chamomile, maybe a pinch of mint to keep it honest. You take a sip, smooth, heavy, comforting. It spreads through your chest like velvet in liquid form. A quirky tidbit flutters into your mind. Some Plantagenet nobles believed poppy tea could enhance dreams, allowing them to glean divine or symbolic messages. One chronicler claimed a king saw a vision of a golden boar delivering political advice after drinking a heavy brew, which honestly raises more questions than answers. A court physician enters the chamber carrying a leather-bound herbal manuscript bristling with bookmarks. He looks exhausted in the way only medieval doctors can, equal parts overworked and wildly confident. He explains to the noblewoman that her nightly draught will soothe her nerves and help her sleep. Then he turns to you and adds, "Good for unsettled humours, good for wandering thoughts, good for," he pauses, "virtually everything, really." You nod politely, though you can't help thinking this is medieval for We don't entirely know what this does, but it seems nice. Historians still argue whether certain nobles genuinely relied on poppy mixtures, or whether the records exaggerate its prevalence, the physician continues, flipping through his manuscript as if checking his citations. You watch him stir another cup, his hand steady, his expression serene. Considering the gentle, floaty feeling fuzzing the edges of your thoughts, you suspect nobles use these teas more often than the official documents let on. You're invited to the Great Hall for supper. The long tables gleam with polished brass candlesticks, dripping wax like slow, thoughtful tears. Hearth fires roar at both ends of the room. Nobles sit in clusters, sipping their herbal concoctions as if discussing the weather requires careful sedation. You take another sip of your poppy tea, just enough to feel pleasantly buoyant without risking any awkward hallucinations involving talking boars. Joke number 1 drifts lazily into your head. With how mellow everyone looks, half of Plantagenet England was basically one strong cup away from inventing the world's earliest chill-out playlist. Servants lay down trenchers of bread, roasted duck, spiced apples. You nibble politely. The flavours are rich, warming, perfectly suited to the soft haze hanging over the room. A knight at the next table sways slightly as he describes his most recent campaign. His words are earnest, his gestures dramatic, his sense of linear storytelling compromised. You nod encouragingly, though you're fairly certain he started his story in the middle and is now looping backward. A lady in a blue gown pours more tea from a tall pot decorated with painted hares. She leans toward you conspiratorially. "This one's my recipe," she whispers. "Poppy, valerian, hyssop, and a pinch of ground rose hips." You sip, and the taste deepens, still floral, but with a complexity that suggests she has been refining this recipe for years. "Perfect for easing the mind," she adds. You wonder if the entire hall is collectively easing their minds tonight. As the meal continues, the atmosphere settles into something dreamlike. Conversations become slower, softer. Candle flames wobble gently. A lute player begins a melody so delicate it feels like it's made of feathers and moonlight. You lean back, exhaling, letting the warmth carry you. Gradually servants bring out warm hand cloths scented with lavender. Nobles press them to their faces with sighs that are only mildly dramatic. You run the cloth across your hands, enjoying the soothing heat. The scent blends with the poppy tea still lingering in your cup. For a moment, everything feels suspended. Calm, serene, like you're inside a medieval sleep aid commercial. Joke number 2 tiptoes in. If anyone here has a single coherent thought left, it's probably written down by a monk hiding in the corner for future historians to misinterpret. The noblewoman from earlier approaches, her movements slow and graceful. She thanks you for joining the evening brew and gestures for you to follow her to the solar, a private upper chamber. From the window you can see the mist rolling across the fields like a pale river. Sheep bleat softly in the distance. The moon shines like polished silver. She hands you one last cup, lighter this time, floral and bright. "For clarity and dreams," she murmurs. You smile, unsure if you want clarity or just a warm nap, but you sip anyway. Joke number 3 surfaces. If clarity comes tonight, you hope it shows up in fewer cryptic animal metaphors. The noblewoman dims the lanterns. The corridor hushes. The entire manor seems to exhale. You step back into the hallway, senses softened, breath steady, warmth settling in your bones. Poppy tea still hums gently in your veins. The mist outside curls like a beckoning finger. Your journey continues, through moonlit corridors, down creaking staircases, and onward into the deeper folds of medieval royalty's strangest indulgences. You let the Plantagenet mist curl away behind. You, the softness of poppy tea still humming faintly in your chest. Then the world tilts once more. Your boots find firmer ground, smoother ground, polished stone that clacks gently beneath your steps. The air smells briny at first, then spicy, then unmistakably Venetian. Salt water, peppercorn, and ambition. A gondola's low wooden groan drifts through the night, and lanterns shimmer across black canals like floating coins. You've arrived in medieval Venice, home to mercantile dukes whose fondness for exotic spices occasionally blurred the line between culinary enthusiasm, medicinal experimentation, and, I swear the cinnamon just winked at me. You cross a narrow bridge, its balustrade carved with intertwining dolphins. Below you, water laps hypnotically against stone. Gondoliers glide past, humming softly, their lanterns flickering orange. In the distance, You hear the faint clang of a bell tower announcing the closing of the market stalls. You follow the sound toward a palazzo whose windows blaze with golden light, the kind of brightness that suggests a feast, a negotiation, or a sensory experiment someone may regret later. Inside the courtyard, orange trees grow in enormous ceramic pots painted with curling blue vines. The air is thick with warm, peppery fragrance, like someone dropped a spice market into a marble palace and said, "Yes, this feels correct." A servant hands you a small pouch tied with silk ribbon. You peek inside, tiny grains of something reddish gold. Saffron, sumac, something expensive enough that losing a single grain might require filing paperwork. "There," the servant whispers, tapping the pouch. The Duke swears it sharpens the mind. You raise an eyebrow. At this point in your travels, you've learned every royal substance claims to sharpen, soothe, uplift, or clarify. Still, you inhale the scent drifting from the pouch, and your senses tingle. Not dramatically, not like a revelation, but like someone gently opened a window in your skull. A steward appears beside you and guides you into the feast hall. The ceilings soar, the frescoes swirling with mythological scenes, Neptune holding court, sirens combing their hair, windswept ships tumbling across painted waves. The room glitters with candlelight reflecting off silver platters, glass goblets, and strings of pearls draped over nobles who definitely want you to notice them. The table is a monument to spice-driven extravagance. Candied ginger, pepper-crusted fish, cinnamon-scented pastries, and wine infused with cloves, nutmeg, and, if your nose doesn't deceive you, something slightly too fragrant to be purely culinary. A mainstream historical fact taps politely on your mental door. Venetian elites in the late medieval period spent absurd sums importing spices from the East. Pepper was practically currency. Nutmeg was rumoured to cure plague. Cinnamon was prestige in powdered form. You take a seat near the end of the long table. A noble, with a beard so manicured it should have its own painter, offers you a goblet filled with dark wine. "Spiced," he says proudly. "A Venetian specialty." You sip. The wine is rich, deep, with a sharp, fiery note that races along your tongue. Pepper, definitely. Maybe cloves. Maybe something else, giving it a warmth that spreads a little too smoothly across your shoulders. A duke enters, the room quieting instantly. He wears crimson velvet and enough gold embroidery to blind a small army. He nods at the assembled nobles, his expression half regal, half, "I've tasted everything in the spice trade and I fear nothing." He lifts a cup of golden liquid, saffron wine. According to a quirky tidbit, some Venetian nobles believed saffron enhanced mood, energy, and even spiritual clarity. Given its cost, believing in its magical properties was probably easier than admitting it was just very fancy food colouring. You watch as the Duke takes a slow sip, eyes fluttering half shut. "Magnifico," he murmurs. The room exhales in agreement. You begin to suspect that Venice perfected the art of performance long before it perfected the art of trade. A merchant beside you leans close. Historians still argue whether the more exotic spices caused mild hallucinations in nobles unused to them, he says, swirling his goblet thoughtfully. But I've seen a duke claim pepper let him hear colours. You choke slightly on your wine, unsure whether to believe him or question his life choices. Plates arrive, figs stuffed with almonds, roasted quail dusted with cinnamon, and ravioli filled with ricotta scented faintly with nutmeg. You take a bite. The flavours bloom across your tongue like fireworks, each spice hitting a different corner of your senses. The warmth spreads to your fingertips. The musicians begin playing a lively tune that suddenly feels extra lively. Joke number 1 knocks gently. At this rate, Venice is about 6 cloves away from reinventing aromatherapy by accident. The Duke gestures for the servants to bring out the imports cabinet. The nobles lean forward with eager anticipation. 2 servants roll out a polished wooden chest covered in brass fittings. The lid opens with a soft creak, revealing rows of tiny glass vials, pepper oil, clove paste, myrrh resin, cinnamon tincture, and something amber gold swirling inside a bottle shaped like a teardrop. The Duke plucks that bottle first. "An experiment," he says. "A blend from the East, cardamom, honey, and a hint of something mysterious." You sip cautiously when the bottle comes your way. The taste blossoms warmly, like sunlight wrapped in velvet. Then you feel a tiny spark behind your eyes. Pleasant, harmless, but undeniably noticeable. You blink. The frescoes above you seem to move half an inch. Or maybe that's the wine. Nobles around you begin discussing trade routes, shipwrecks, and whether cinnamon is spiritually aligned with prosperity. A woman swears it, enhances her dreams. A scholar insists pepper improves philosophical reasoning. A sailor mutters that nutmeg once saved him from seasickness. The room hums with spice-fueled conviction. Joke number 2 meanders in. You'd almost think Venice built its empire on the belief that enough cinnamon could solve geopolitics. As the feast continues, the air thickens with scents. Warm, buzzing, stimulating. The music picks up, quickening into a joyful tempest. Nobles laugh louder, gesture wider, speak faster. The spices, the wine, the sensory overload, all of it blends into a sparkling, slightly surreal haze. Eventually you step outside for fresh air. The canal shimmers. Lanterns sway. Gondolas drift past like drowsy insects. The spices still tingle faintly on your tongue. A gondolier calls to you softly. Care for a ride? You descend into the boat, the wood rocking gently beneath you. As he rows, the city glides past. Bridges, balconies, rippling reflections of torchlight. You inhale deeply. The night air is cooler, clearer, but still tinged with distant cloves and saffron. Joke number 3 whispers in. You're pretty sure even the pigeons here have a mild nutmeg buzz. The gondolier sings as he guides you onward, the canal stretching ahead like a silk ribbon, leading you into the next chapter of your wandering, spice-touched medieval journey. You drift away from the candlelit canals of Venice, letting the spice-heavy air fade into something drier, dustier, brighter. The world tilts, the gondola dissolves, and suddenly your boots crunch on sun-baked earth. A warm, restless wind brushes past your face, carrying hints of acacia sap, livestock and roasted grain. You blink, and the Venetian palazzo is gone. In its place stands a sprawling courtyard shaded by broad fig trees, their leaves trembling in the heat. You've arrived in the Horn of Africa, somewhere within the domain of medieval kings who ruled over stone citadels, caravan routes, and, most relevant to you tonight, a beloved plant that brightened spirits and sharpened conversations. Cat. Your eyes adjust to the bright sunlight. The courtyard stones glow the colour of toasted bread. Servants carry jugs of cool water, clay bowls of dates, and bundles of fresh, glossy cat leaves wrapped in damp cloth. The leaves are narrow, waxy, and a vivid green that almost snaps with life. A noble gestures for you to approach a low table shaded by a woven canopy. The air beneath it is cooler, gentler, touched with the scent of dried herbs. A steward places a small bundle of cat before you. For wakefulness, he says with a polite bow. You lift the leafy bundle, turning it over in your hands. It smells grassy, slightly bitter, but undeniably fresh. There's your mainstream historical fact. Cat, known locally by many names, was widely used across the Horn of Africa and Arabian Peninsula for centuries. Chewing the fresh leaves releases compounds that act as a stimulant, brightening mood and sharpening focus. Medieval kings, judges, poets, and merchants often enjoyed it during long nights of conversation and debate. You sit on a cushion beside the king's advisor, a man whose eyes sparkle with clarity that suggests he has been debating for a while. He tears a sprig from his own bundle and pops it into his mouth with practiced ease. Strengthens thinking, he says, chewing thoughtfully. Keeps the mind awake when matters of state refuse to sleep. You nod, though you can't help remembering how many rulers claim the same about their favourite indulgences. Still, curiosity wins. You take a leaf, fold it, and chew. The bitterness hits first, sharp, earthy. Then something warm flickers behind your eyes. Not overwhelming, not dreamy, just alert, focused, like someone whispered a quiet, "Hey, wake up," inside your skull. You shift slightly on the cushions, feeling its effect settle in like a rising drumbeat. A noblewoman approaches with a platter of honey-sweetened bread. "It balances the bitterness," she says with a smile. You take a small bite, and the sugar smooths the sharp edge of the cut. The combination feels strangely uplifting, like the culinary equivalent of someone patting you encouragingly on the shoulder. A group of elite guards sits nearby beneath a sycamore tree, each chewing cat as they discuss battle, formations and troop movements. Their conversation is rapid, like someone pressed fast forward on their thoughts. One gestures broadly, his hand slicing through the air. Another nods vigorously, A third scribbles notes onto a wooden tablet with the urgency of a man who refuses to let thoughts escape before he catches them. A quirky tidbit nudges at your memory. Some medieval chroniclers claimed certain kings used kiat during all-night strategic sessions, gaining a reputation for uncanny energy. Whether that energy resulted in brilliant decisions or catastrophic sleep deprivation is largely unrecorded. The king himself appears, robed in indigo-dyed cloth that glimmers faintly in the sunlight. His crown is simple yet commanding, gold with carved geometric patterns. He steps beneath the canopy and lowers himself gracefully onto a cushion. A servant immediately offers him a fresh bundle of leaves. The king accepts, tears a handful free and begins chewing with calm, steady rhythm. Historians still argue whether cat influenced political decisions, the king murmurs, as though he has read your thoughts. Some say it sharpened minds, others say it sharpened tempers. He smiles knowingly. You watch him chew, his posture straight, his gaze focused like a hawk, studying distant movement. A storyteller approaches and kneels, ready to recount events of distant caravans. His voice is lively, animated. As he describes merchants crossing desert plains, dodging bandits and discovering new trade routes, you find yourself leaning forward, not doped, not dazed, but strangely alert. The leaves are definitely doing something. Joke number 1 breezes in. Apparently cat is medieval espresso with a side of, I might solve a geopolitical crisis tonight. Musicians gather at the courtyard's edge, drummers, flute players, string performers. Their music begins softly but quickens gradually, responding to the heightened energy around them. Rhythms interlock, bouncing off the courtyard walls like lively conversation. One noble taps out the beat on his knee, chewing steadily. Another sways gently, smiling as though he's rediscovering joy in every single note. You wander to the courtyard's perimeter, where carved stone columns support the overhanging roof. From here, you can see the bustling market beyond the palace gates. Merchants bargaining, camels shifting their weight, traders displaying spices and fabrics. A cluster of younger nobles stands near the gate, each holding a small bouquet of cat leaves while discussing poetry, philosophy, and possibly which colours look best in royal portraits. Their voices are bright, quick, buoyant. You take another leaf, chew. The effect deepens, not dizzying, not floaty, just clearer, brighter, almost too bright, like the world's saturation dial nudged up one tick. An elderly scholar approaches, holding a scroll filled with looping script. He squints at you, then at your bundle. Careful, he says, not unkindly. Generous chewing leads to long discussions. Long discussions lead to late nights. Late nights lead to questionable decisions. He smiles. Ask any king. You laugh, because that wisdom spans centuries and continents. Joke number 2 tumbles into your thoughts. You suddenly understand why some medieval negotiations lasted until sunrise. Everyone was too alert to call it quits. The king calls for refreshments. Servants bring bowls of cool water, plates of roasted goat, and sticky sweet honey cakes. You nibble, grateful for the grounding sensation of warm food. The cat's clarity mixes pleasantly with the meal's richness. A noble recounts a legend. An ancient hero who stayed awake 3 days straight by chewing enchanted leaves while hunting an enormous lion. The king chuckles. Nonsense, he says. No one stays awake 3 days. 2, perhaps. You're not sure whether he's joking. As the afternoon light softens into gold, the courtyard grows livelier. Friendly debates break out. Over strategy, literature, theology, even camel breeds. The atmosphere feels electric, but not frantic, just alive. You step into the shade beneath a fig tree and breathe deeply. The leaves' scent lingers on your hands. The breeze cools your cheeks. Joke number 3 rests softly in your mind. You could absolutely win an argument right now, if only you had any idea what to argue about. The king rises, brushing dust from his robe. Nobles follow, energized and focused. Discussions continue as they walk toward the audience hall. You join them, the courtyard flickering behind you, like a memory carved in sunlight and green leaves. Your steps feel lighter, your mind slightly brighter, as you follow the hum of voices deeper into the palace, carried forward into the next unfolding chapter of your drifting medieval journey. You feel the last flicker of cat-born clarity hum in your mind as the sunlit courtyard dissolves behind you. The earthy bitterness fades, the heat softens, and soon the air shifts once more. Cooler, denser, tinged with smoke and spice. Sandstone walls rise around you like giant ancient guardians. You're walking through a narrow alley in Cairo, Mamluk Cairo. Its archways carved like lace, its shadows long and warm, its streets pulsing with late-night movement. Somewhere nearby you hear laughter, music, and the unmistakable bubbling of water through a narrow clay pipe. You've arrived in the world of cannabis tinctures, infused teas and herbal brews enjoyed quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, by Mamluk leaders who prided themselves on discipline, but also valued a good evening unwind. You follow the sound of bubbling to a courtyard glowing with lamplight. Marble tiles gleam underfoot. Palm fronds sway overhead. A small fountain gurgles calmly at the centre, its reflection rippling like a second moon. Several Mamluk officers sit on cushions arranged in a circle, dressed in richly embroidered robes, silks, layered over chain shirts because fashion waits for no battlefield. Between them rests a brass tray loaded with tiny glass cups, a steaming teapot, and a bottle of dark green tincture that sparkles when it catches the flame. A tall officer waves you over, his moustache curled into a shape that suggests self-confidence, bordering on structural engineering. "Join us," he says warmly. "We discuss matters of state." Judging by the looseness in his posture, the matters of state may involve fewer spreadsheets and more philosophical detours. A servant hands you a cup barely larger than a thimble. Inside is a warm, fragrant brew-coloured amber green. It smells herbal, slightly sweet, with a musky undertone that screams this might be stronger than you expect. You glance at the tincture bottle, its surface painted with vines and stars, and notice tiny droplets added to each officer's cup. The servant gives you the same treatment. "Just a little," he says with a grin, "for clarity." There it is again. Medieval royalty really did believe every intoxicant granted mystical clarity. You sip. The flavour blooms across your tongue. Earthy, sharp, a little sweet, a little spicy. The warmth spreads down your throat, settling into your chest like a soft lantern lighting from within. A gentle haze tugs at your thoughts. Not enough to fog them, just enough to soften everything like a silk veil. There's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval Egypt, especially during Mamluk rule, saw widespread use of cannabis in various forms: edibles, tinctures, incense, and infused teas. While hashish wasn't universally embraced. Courts sometimes banned it, sometimes tolerated it, sometimes pretended to tolerate it. Many soldiers and nobles used herbal mixes to relax after grueling campaigns. The officer beside you sighs contentedly and leans back. "Good after sparring," he murmurs, or after listening to tax arguments, or, well, after anything. You nod sympathetically. Everyone everywhere seems to need an occasional break from tax arguments. A smaller officer, barely older than 20, holds up the tincture bottle proudly. "My cousin prepares this blend," he says. "Cannabis flower, mint, coriander, a touch of honey." You swirl your cup gently, appreciating the aroma. He adds, "Historians still argue whether these tinctures improved creativity, or just made us think our ideas were better than they were." You nearly choke on your sip, laughing. Fair point. Another officer gestures for a musician to begin playing. A round-backed owl begins to sing, deep warm notes rippling through the courtyard like silk being slowly unravelled. The sound vibrates through your chest, blending with the subtle cannabis warmth settling behind your eyes. Lanterns sway gently overhead. The courtyard feels alive. Joke number 1 lands easily. Honestly, with an oud soundtrack like this, even your grocery list would feel profound. The conversation evolves. First, military formations. Then, horse training. Then, the philosophical question of whether horses appreciate poetry. The officers debate passionately. One insists horses respond to meter. Another claims his mount prefers dramatic pauses. The tincture might be contributing. You glance toward the fountain, its surface shimmering. The moon above splits into soft reflections. The ripples look mesmerizing, layered, textured. Not quite hallucinatory, but definitely prettier than normal. You blink slowly and smile. A servant appears with a plate of honey pastries sprinkled with sesame. Their sweetness cuts the herbal bitterness perfectly. You take a bite and immediately feel your soul ascend one level. The eldest officer clears his throat. There is a tale, he begins, that Sultan Baybars himself once used a cannabis salve for pain after a particularly fierce hunt. A younger officer snorts. A salve, he says. Not a tea, not a tincture, just a salve. They exchange conspiratorial looks. The story continues with increasingly dramatic flourishes. Baybars, tigers, heroic leaps, improbable gymnastics. You're pretty sure at least half of this is fabricated, but you're too entertained to care. A scholar sitting nearby chimes in. Some say these herbs help warriors see patterns in battle. Others say it makes them talk too much. He eyes the group meaningfully, as they indeed talk too much. Joke number 2 strolls in, comfortable and self-assured. If strategic clarity comes from this tea, generals everywhere should include a vibes department. You sit back, letting the sounds and scents wash over you. The oud, the bubbling water pipe in the corner, the warm breeze carrying notes of coriander and mint. Smoke drifts upward in lazy curls, painting brief shapes in the air, shapes that dissolve as quickly as thoughts. The officers invite you to a rooftop overlooking the city. You climb the stairs, your steps steady but pleasantly light. When you emerge, Cairo stretches before you, a vast tapestry of domes, minarets, lantern-lit alleys, and distant laughter drifting on the wind. The air is cooler up here, the tincture's warmth glowing inside you like a sleeping coal. One officer gestures broadly at the city lights. All this, he says, becomes clearer after a cup. Then he frowns thoughtfully. Or maybe everything becomes clearer after letting go of needing clarity. You consider this. Sounds deep. Or maybe it sounds deep because your cup was potent. Joke number 3 settles in with perfect timing. Congratulations. You've reached the everything is a metaphor stage of the evening. The wind brushes your hair, lanterns flicker, the officers fall into a quiet, satisfied calm. Below, the city breathes. Warm, ancient, alive. You walk back toward the stairway, the tincture's subtle glow trailing behind your thoughts like a soft tail of incense smoke. Another chapter of indulgent royalty unfolds ahead of you, waiting just beyond the next shift of the world. The rooftop haze of Mamluk Cairo dissolves like incense smoke caught in a changing wind. The soft herbal warmth lingering behind your eyes gives way to something humid, fragrant, and intensely alive. When the world steadies again, you're surrounded by thick tropical air, warm as bathwater and sweet as ripe fruit. A palace rises before you, its curved roofs shimmering with glazed tiles the colour of deep jade. Lanterns sway gently from carved wooden beams, their light dancing over pools filled with floating jasmine blossoms. You've drifted into the Malay world, into the courts of sultans whose love of clove, nutmeg, and aromatic delights shaped ceremony, diplomacy, and nightly unwinding rituals that bordered on the poetic. You inhale. Immediately the air hits you with layered fragrance, clove bud, beetle leaf, frangipani, a whisper of sandalwood. It's rich, warm, almost dizzying. A servant in a brilliantly patterned sarong approaches carrying a small lacquered tray. Upon it sits a tiny porcelain bowl filled with clove buds and slices of nutmeg that glisten with oil. He bows and gestures for you to take one. For warmth, he offers, and sharp thoughts. Of course. Medieval clarity makes yet another appearance tonight. You pick up a clove bud and roll it between your fingers. The scent bursts upward. Peppery, sweet, pungent. You chew. The taste is intense. Fiery at first, then numbing, then sweet. It spreads across your mouth in waves, leaving your tongue tingling and your mind surprisingly awake. Not racing, not foggy, just warm, lifted, flickering with alertness like a lantern catching new oxygen. There's your mainstream historical fact. Cloves and nutmeg were treasured commodities across the Malay archipelago, long before Europe grew obsessed with them. Local rulers used them medicinally, socially and ceremonially. Some mixtures, especially clove-heavy ones, were believed to energize the body and sharpen perception. You follow the servant into a wide pillared hall where the Sultan's nobles lounge on embroidered cushions. The architecture is fluid, curved beams, carved ceilings, silk drapes catching the breeze. A low table at the centre overflows with fresh betel leaves, areca nut slices, lime paste, and small bowls of spices. The nobles prepare betel quids with practiced ease. folding leaves around nut and spice, adding clove buds like punctuation marks. One noble waves you over with a smile so relaxed it could cure insomnia. He hands you a prepared quid. You turn it in your hands, admiring the craftsmanship. He leans in and whispers, "This blend, very good for long conversations." His eyes glint. You take a cautious bite. Warmth spreads at once, tingly, aromatic, energizing. The clove's numbing effect wraps around your gums. Nutmeg adds a mellow sweetness. The betel leaf grounds everything with a gentle bitterness. It's a sensory progression. Zing, bloom, hum. You swallow slowly, letting it settle. A quirky tidbit dances into your mind. Some Malay chronicles describe kings using clove-heavy mixtures before council meetings, believing the spice helped them remain eloquent and composed. Whether it truly improved eloquence or merely made them feel eloquent is, well, historically murky. A court poet approaches carrying a palm leaf manuscript. He bows, then recites a verse about fragrant breezes guiding the mind toward truth. The nobles nod sagely, chewing their quids and definitely believing him. You feel the warmth rising through your chest, encouraging your posture to straighten and your thoughts to unfurl like ferns meeting sunlight. Historians still argue whether these aromatic indulgences produce psychoactive effects, the poet confides between verses, but they certainly produce longer stories. You grin. Based on the atmosphere, he might be underselling it. Musicians take their places near the far wall, gong, rabab, bamboo flute. The first notes shimmer into the air, more liquid than sound, rising and falling like waves sliding across sand. The clove warmth enhances the music, each vibration settling into your ribs. You exhale slowly, feeling the numbing sweet blend mellow into something pleasantly buoyant. Joke number 1 wanders gently into your thoughts. With this much clove in the air, you're probably immune to vampires, boredom, and maybe even awkward small talk. The Sultan enters, robes of gold-threaded silk trailing behind him, his presence so calm and scented he could be mistaken for a walking incense burner. Servants approach with trays of spiced drinks, cinnamon, nutmeg, palm sugar. He sips delicately, then gestures for everyone to continue their relaxed debates. A noblewoman seated nearby asks your opinion on maritime trade winds. You attempt to answer, only to realize she's already moved on to discussing the philosophy of scent as communication. You nod wisely, despite having no idea where the conversation began. Outside, the night hums with insects and rustling palm leaves. A servant escorts you to a balcony overlooking the harbour. Dozens of lantern-lit ships sway gently against the docks, trading vessels from Java, China, India. Their sails furl and unfurl like giant resting wings. The air is thick with spice, clove smoke, cinnamon bark, nutmeg drying in baskets. You take another small piece of clove. Its heat spreads again, this time more subtly, like a glowing ember tucked into your chest. The world sharpens, not in an intense way, but in a suddenly everything seems interesting way. Joke number 2 settles smoothly. You finally understand why Malay sultans wrote poetry during council meetings. They were probably vibing on cloves and existential clarity. As you lean on the balcony railing, a breeze carries the scent of the ocean mixed with the spice-laden palace air. Light from the lanterns below ripples across the water, shimmering gold and red like molten jewels. A palace scholar approaches softly. "Clove warms the blood," he says, handing you a small carved container. "Nutmeg warms the mind. Together they open small doors in perception." He pauses. Not large doors, just small ones. You laugh quietly, feeling the truth in his words. Nothing hallucinatory, nothing overwhelming, just little openings, tiny fireworks of sensory awareness sparking gently in your thoughts. He gestures toward the hall behind you. "Careful," he adds. "Too much nutmeg and you'll open doors you didn't plan on visiting." You nod. Nutmeg's unpredictable effects are indeed historically documented. Joke number 3 drifts in like a satisfied sigh. You're beginning to suspect medieval rulers everywhere used clarity as code for "this makes boring meetings bearable." You wander back inside. The music swells, nobles laugh. Spice-scented smoke curls through the beams overhead. Clove's warmth thrums gently through your veins, not urging, not pulling, just pleasantly lifting. You settle beside a carved pillar, letting the lantern glow wash over you. The palace pulses with colour, sound and scent, and as you take one more slow breath of clove-rich air, you feel the world prepare to shift again, carrying you onward through the winding spice trails of royal indulgence. You let the clove-warm air of the Malay palace drift away, dissolving like steam into a breeze that feels suddenly cooler, drier, and scented with something unmistakably rich and earthy. The humidity fades, lantern glow dims. When your vision settles, you're standing barefoot on a thick Persian carpet, so soft you feel like you've stepped onto woven clouds. All around you, tall columns rise toward a vaulted ceiling painted with curling vines, golden suns, and delicate blue blossoms. You're in a royal Persian hall, somewhere in the medieval centuries when saffron was worth its weight in precious metal, and shahs indulged in golden infusions that promised vitality, joy, brightness, and occasionally a little too much enthusiasm. A servant glides toward you holding a silver tray engraved with sunbursts. On it rests a small porcelain bowl filled with strands of saffron, thin crimson threads glowing as though lit from within. Their aroma drifts upward, honey-like, floral, a little metallic, a little mysterious. For the heart and mind, the servant murmurs. His Majesty begins every evening with it. You pick up a few strands. They feel feather-light, almost unreal. You rub them gently. The scent intensifies, sweet but sharp, like sunlight filtered through blossoms. Somewhere deep inside you, warmth stirs. A courtier approaches, robes shimmering with gold thread so fine it looks like liquid metal draped across fabric. He motions for you to follow him through an archway into the royal divan. The room is dim and inviting, lit by dozens of oil lamps that flicker against mirrored panels set into the walls. Cushions in rich blues and purples cover the floor, each embroidered with swirling patterns shaped like wind and water. In the centre sits a low table. On it, a teapot filled with saffron-infused water, a bowl of yogurt mixed with saffron and honey, and a dish of rice tinted bright yellow from the spice. A mainstream historical fact settles neatly into your thoughts. Medieval Persian royalty prized saffron not only for its flavour and colour but for its believed medicinal qualities, mood-lifting, invigorating, even aphrodisiac. Physicians prescribed it. Poets praised it. Shahs drank it like liquid optimism. You're handed a small cup of saffron tea. The liquid glows gold, almost luminous. You sip. Heat floods your chest. Not burning, not overwhelming, but warm in a way that makes your ribs feel like sunlit stone. The taste is complex. Honey-sweet, grassy, faintly metallic. You blink slowly. Something inside your mind brightens, as though a dusty window has just been wiped clean. A scholar seated nearby leans forward. Some say saffron opens the senses, others say it opens the heart. He dips his fingers into the bowl of saffron yogurt and tastes it thoughtfully. Historians still argue whether the Shahs used it medicinally or simply enjoyed the brilliance it brought to their feasts. A poet at his side snorts. It brings brilliance to everything, he says, gesturing broadly. To food, to poetry, to conversation, to... He pauses dramatically. Dancing. You're not sure whether that's truth or sales pitch, but based on the warm bloom inside your skull, you're willing to entertain the idea. A servant refills your cup, adding a few fresh strands that bloom into orange clouds as they steep. You sip again. Your vision sharpens slightly. Textures pop. The mirrored walls reflect lamplight like tiny stars. The carpet under your feet feels deeper, softer, as if inviting you to sink. Joke number 1 hums gently. At this rate, you're about 2 sips away from composing a heartfelt poem to a piece of furniture. The Shah enters, tall, commanding, dressed in robes embroidered with pomegranates and suns. His crown is simple but elegant, encrusted with gems that glow like captured sparks. He greets his court, then settles onto a cushion. A servant pours him a cup of saffron tea without asking. Clearly this is routine. The Shah inhales the aroma deeply. His eyelids flutter, just briefly, but enough to suggest appreciation bordering on reverence. Golden threads, he says aloud, for golden thoughts. The court murmurs in agreement, some nodding a little too enthusiastically. The saffron may be helping. A musician enters with a santoor, its strings shimmering under lamplight. He begins to play, each note delicate but resonant. The sound settles into your bones. The saffron warmth intensifies it, giving the music a soft halo, as though each vibration leaves a glowing trail in the air. Nearby, two scholars debate the effects of saffron. One claims it improves memory, the other insists it enhances joy. A third, chewing thoughtfully on a honey saffron sweet, offers, perhaps it merely makes the world taste better. Joke number 2 rises like a gentle spark. You're starting to think the world tastes better because these people put saffron in absolutely everything, including, possibly, their laundry. A dancer enters the room, her movements fluid as water. Streams of saffron-coloured silk trail behind her, catching the lamplight. She circles the divan, her steps in perfect harmony with the santor. The scent of incense, sweet myrrh and burning saffron threads, drifts through the archways, making the whole scene shimmer. You sit back, letting the warmth flow through you. It's not a heavy feeling. It doesn't tug you into sleep or float you into dreams. Instead, it lifts. Like gentle hands raising your spirits 1 inch at a time, a physician kneels beside you holding a small clay jar. Saffron salve, he explains, for melancholy, for stiffness, for nights when the mind refuses to find joy. He opens the lid. The scent bursts forth, saffron mixed with rose oil. He dabs a little on your wrist, your skin tingles pleasantly. You wander toward a balcony overlooking the royal gardens. The night is cool, but the saffron glow in your chest keeps you comfortably warm. Below, cypress trees sway, water channels snake through geometric garden beds. Lamps hang like stars pulled to earth. A courtier joins you, leaning on the railing. This land, he says, blooms with golden light. Saffron teaches us to see it. He pauses. Or perhaps it simply makes us believe we see it. Joke number 3 sighs into your mind. Either way, your perception is now officially dipped in saffron like a fancy medieval cupcake. The court continues to hum behind you, music, laughter, clinking cups, rustling silk. The warmth of the spice lingers in your breath, your thoughts, your fingertips. You take one last sip of the golden tea. The world glows gently around you, and as you step away from the balcony, the saffron warmth drifts with you, guiding you onward into the next unfolding chamber of this long, winding royal night. The saffron glow dims, softening like embers settling beneath ash, and the Persian divan melts away. Humid air rises around you, dense, fragrant, alive. The ground beneath your feet shifts from woven carpet to warm stone. A chorus of cicadas hums somewhere beyond the walls. Torchlight flickers through carved wooden shutters, and the scent of betel nut, lime, and blossoming frangipani drifts past your nose like a beckoning hand. When your vision clears, you're standing at the entrance to a Khmer palace, part temple, part royal residence, part daydream carved from jungle and devotion. Towering bas-reliefs stretch across the stone corridors, their lines soft with age but powerful in their storytelling. Gods, nagas, dancing apsaras, kings in chariots drawn by lions. The air is thick, golden, shimmering with the heat of an evening that hasn't finished cooking. A servant in a wrapped sampot approaches, bowing with palms pressed together. In his hand he carries a small circular tray lined with delicate green leaves, slices of areca nut, dried tobacco, and tiny bowls of spices. For energy and brightness, he says gently. The royals take it before councils, and sometimes before dancing. You inhale. The betel leaf is fresh and sharp, peppery, botanical. The areca nut beside it has a sweetness hidden beneath earthiness. You pick one leaf up. It's slightly cool, slightly sticky, like it's holding a secret. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Khmer royalty and nobility regularly chewed betel, a mixture of leaf, areca nut, slaked lime paste, and sometimes tobacco or spices. It stained the mouth red, sharpened alertness, and became a central social ritual, from ceremonies to diplomacy to casual evening conversation. An attendant folds a leaf effortlessly, places a pinch of lime, a sliver of nut, a sprinkle of clove, then hands you the neat little parcel. Chew slowly, he advises. It begins sharp, then warm. You take a bite. First comes the bitterness, quick, green, almost shocking. Then warmth floods your mouth, seeping into your gums, your jaw, your throat. A tingle spreads. Nothing overwhelming, just a steady hum, as if your nerves suddenly remembered they had jobs to do. The flavour deepens, turning mildly sweet, pleasantly earthy. As you continue chewing, a gentle buoyancy rises in your chest. A noblewoman glides past, her gold jewellery chiming softly. She smiles when she notices your reddening lips. "Ah," she says, amused, "you're welcomed." It seems Beetle is both stimulant and social passport. She gestures for you to follow her into a grand hall. Thick wooden beams support a steep railed roof carved with celestial dancers. Torches flicker, their flames bending in the humid air. The hall hums with activity. Nobles reclining on silk cushions, dancers stretching, musicians tuning their Renitan tro. Every mouth here is stained with the telltale red of a long evening's beetle chewing. A court scholar sits by a column, ink-stained fingers tapping lightly on a palm leaf manuscript. Beetle, he explains, brings clarity, yes, but also courage. A king should not speak on an empty mind or an empty mouth. You're not sure if that's metaphor or ritual guideline, but considering how energized you feel, you see the appeal. He leans closer, lowering his voice. Historians still argue whether the areca nut had mild psychoactive effects, or whether royal expectation shaped the experience. He shrugs elegantly. Perhaps both. The mind answers to many masters. Musicians begin to play, a slow, bending melody that seems to float like incense smoke. Dancers step into the firelight, movements precise yet fluid, each gesture meaningful. The beetle warmth in your blood makes the rhythm feel sharper, the colours brighter, the details of each carved panel more vivid. Joke number 1 arrives softly. With Beetle's energy boost and the humidity tag-teaming your senses, even standing still feels like participating in choreography. A servant offers you a brass bowl of cool water. You drink gratefully, the liquid soothing, the spice lingering in your throat. Another offers slices of tamarind dipped in salt and sugar. The sourness grounds you instantly. The king enters next, tall, adorned in gold and red silk, his headdress rising like a stylized mountain peak. His movements are deliberate, confident, rhythmic. He carries a small silver container at his hip, his personal beetle kit. When he notices you, he smiles broadly, lips stained dark red. He sits on a raised platform. Servants lay out scrolls, advisors gather around. But instead of diving into political matters, the king unwraps a fresh beetle parcel, folds it with care and begins to chew before speaking. You watch as his posture sharpens and his gaze brightens. Whether from ritual, stimulant, or simply comfort is hard to say. A general sitting nearby confides, "On campaigns, we carry beetle. Keeps men awake, keeps spirits strong, and," he adds with a grin, "keeps boredom away." His laughter rings warmly. Joke number 2 slides in. Forget energy drinks. Khmer armies marched on tiny green leaves and sheer willpower. The king begins discussing irrigation canals, trade routes, temple restoration, poetry recitals, sometimes in the same breath. The room follows his pace easily. Beetle parcels pass from hand to hand like little bundles of momentum. You chew again, feeling your mind vibrate gently, like a drum warmed by sunlight. Eventually the meeting dissolves into relaxed conversation. Courtiers drift toward open windows to catch the faint nighttime breeze. Cicadas pulse in steady rhythm. The dancers resume slow stretching, bodies glimmering in torchlight. A young noble approaches with a lacquered box decorated with gold relief. Inside are beetle leaves painted with delicate herbal pastes, ginger, clove, cardamom. Special blends, he says proudly, for moods, for memory, for focus. You ask which one he recommends. He taps a leaf lined with ginger paste. "This one," he says. "It makes everything brighter." You elect not to risk doubling up. You've learned enough about clarity enhancers tonight to remain cautious. The noble nods approvingly at your restraint. Joke number 3 hums comfortably. If you tried every blend offered to you tonight, you'd probably start negotiating trade agreements with the temple statues. As the night deepens, the hall glows with a softer gold. The air cools, slightly. The beetle's warmth lingers in your chest, in your fingertips, in your thoughts. You step outside into the moonlit courtyard. Lotus ponds shimmer beneath stone walkways. The air smells of wet earth, jasmine, and the faint pepperiness of beetle still clinging to your breath. Fireflies drift lazily near the water, their bodies blinking like small wandering stars. The palace seems to breathe with you, calm, rhythmic, timeless. And as you walk along the pond's edge, the red warmth fading gently in your mouth, you feel the world beginning to tilt again, ready to carry you onward to the next strange, fragrant corner of medieval royalty. The warm red hum of beetle slowly unwinds inside you, loosening into something cooler, darker, more mysterious. The humid jungle air fades. The carved stone corridors soften. Then everything rearranges itself into towering pine trunks, damp undergrowth, and the sound of distant owls calling across a midnight forest. A faint mist curls around your ankles like a living thing. You've stepped into medieval Slavic lands, where princes rode beneath dense canopies, hunted beneath silver moons, and occasionally experimented with forest mushrooms that, well, let's just call them spiritually suggestive. The forest smells rich. Earth, moss, pine resin, and something faintly metallic in the distance. You step forward onto a narrow trail. The moonlight drips through branches overhead like spilled milk. A mounted escort waits ahead, cloaks fluttering softly in the cold wind. One rider waves you forward. "The Prince wishes company," he says, voice low but warm. "Tonight is a night for wandering thoughts." You follow them through the forest until a clearing opens like a quiet breath, moonlit, ringed by birch trees, and centered around a low fire. The blaze crackles gently, sending sparks upward like tiny comets. A boar roasts nearby on a spit, its scent thick and comforting. But what really catches your attention is the woven basket on a wooden stump, filled with mushrooms in colours you weren't entirely prepared for. A cluster of pale brown caps, a few with deep red tops spotted faintly white, and several that look innocent enough, until you notice the prince watching them with a small smile that's entirely too knowing. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval Slavic cultures, especially in rural regions, used mushrooms not only as food, but in rituals, most notably fly agaric, Amanita muscaria, the iconic red and white mushroom with folklore ties to shamanic practices. Princes didn't necessarily partake regularly, but stories linger of nobles who experimented during hunts, feasts, or spiritual rites. The prince rises as you approach. He's tall, fur-cloaked, broad-shouldered, the sort of noble who could probably bench-press a horse. His beard gleams copper in the firelight. "Welcome," he says as he gestures to the basket. "A gift from the forest, for clarity, of course." Of course. At this point in your journey, you're convinced every pre-modern society claimed their favourite intoxicant enhanced clarity. You kneel beside him as he selects a few mushrooms, carefully avoiding the more dangerous varieties, and slices them into a wooden bowl with berries and warm honey. "This blend," he explains, "is mild, enough to thin the veil, not enough to tear it." You take a cautious bite. The flavour is earthy, slightly bitter, softened by the honey's sweetness. Nothing dramatic happens immediately, but a warmth begins to grow behind your eyes, not unlike the glow of saffron earlier, but with a wilder, more unpredictable edge. It nudges your thoughts sideways, loosening seams you didn't know had seams. A hunter sits nearby, feeding small pieces of mushroom to the fire and watching the sparks rise. "My grandmother swore these open the mind to the forest's whispers," he says. Historians still argue whether these mushrooms were truly hallucinogenic in princely households or simply symbolic. He shrugs. But the stories are real. Princes listening to trees, kings debating with rivers. Good stories. The warmth in your chest deepens slightly. The air feels thicker, richer. You become aware of every sound. The crackle of fire, the rustle of leaves, the hoot of an owl so distant it feels like memory rather than noise. You notice patterns in the branches overhead you're not entirely sure were patterns a moment ago. Joke number 1 saunters in. Either the mushrooms are working, or the forest just. Turn the contrast settings up to 11. The prince pours a drink from a horn, a fermented berry brew with a tart bite. It blends with the mushroom warmth too easily. He gestures for a musician to play. A gusli begins to sing, soft, plucked notes that echo through the clearing like ripples in water. The music feels elongated, stretched, Every note hangs in the air a fraction longer than expected. A noblewoman sits beside you, chewing lightly on a mushroom slice of her own. "Do you see it yet?" she asks cryptically. You blink at her. "See what?" She smiles knowingly. "Wait." Minutes, or what might be minutes, pass. The fire pops loudly, sending sparks spiraling upward. One spark seems to drift higher than expected, twirling like a tiny star caught in slow motion. You exhale. The world exhales back. A fringe tidbit pops into your mind. In some Slavic folklore, consuming certain mushrooms during rituals granted visions of ancestral spirits, or glimpses into hidden truths. It's impossible to know whether the tales were exaggerated or literal, but sitting here, surrounded by firelight and whispering trees, you can imagine how such beliefs took root. The prince leans closer. "Do not fear the forest," he says softly. "It speaks only when you listen." His tone is gentle, not commanding but encouraging, like someone guiding you through a dream. You glance around, shadows flicker oddly, light bends around branches in ways your brain doesn't entirely understand. Not frightening, just unfamiliar, like looking at the world through a kaleidoscope made of moss and moonlight. Joke number 2 drifts in. If you start understanding tree gossip tonight, you're billing the prince for emotional labour. A group of warriors begins telling stories, wolf spirits, enchanted lakes, riddles whispered by ghosts. You listen, entranced, feeling each story settle into the mushroom-warmed corners of your mind. The blend of myth, firelight, and altered perception makes everything feel symbolic, layered with hidden meaning. You take a deep breath. The forest smells different now, sweeter, sharper, fuller, like each scent pulls you subtly in a different direction. The prince watches you with a soft smile. "You feel it," he says. "Good. But stay balanced. Too much, and the forest takes more than it gives." You nod. Mild or not, the mushrooms are present. A gust of wind shakes the birch leaves, scattering silver moonflecks onto the ground. For a moment, the pattern looks like a constellation laid at your feet. You blink, and it becomes leaves again. You're not hallucinating exactly, just perceiving sideways. Joke number 3 lands gently. You suddenly understand why medieval princes thought mushrooms could reveal destiny. Right now, a leaf could probably reveal your tax future. Eventually, the warmth softens. The edges of the world resettle. The forest's glow dims back to normal moonlight. You feel grounded again, still alert, still tinged with honeyed dreaminess but present. The prince stands and clasps your shoulder. "The forest welcomes travellers who listen," he says. "Tonight, you listened." You follow the fading firelight toward the trail leading out of the clearing. The birches sway softly as if nodding farewell. And as you walk back into the deeper woods, the mushroom warmth ebbing gently, you feel the world preparing to shift once more. Your journey drifting toward its next royal indulgence in this long, strange medieval night. Medieval. The birch-lit forest exhales behind you, its mushroom soft glow fading like the last flicker of an ember. The air cools, dries, and then slowly thickens with a scent so delicate you almost miss it at first. A faint sweetness, a floral whisper, a soft rising note like the opening of a dream. The mist around you shifts. Pine becomes mountain air, moss becomes marble, moonlit branches soften into carved stone arches. When your vision clears, you're stepping into a Georgian royal court perched high in the Caucasus, where mountains scrape the sky, wine flows like poetry, and rosewater drifts through palace halls like a gentle, intoxicating ghost. You breathe in. The scent is unmistakable. Rosewater, distilled with obsessive care, poured into flasks of blown glass, sprinkled into fountains and steam baths, mixed into teas, perfumes, even ceremonial inks. The court here uses rosewater the way other courts use politics, liberally, strategically, and with artistic flair. A servant approaches, bowing slightly. He carries a silver tray holding a crystal vial. "For the senses," he says, "a royal blend." You unstopper it tentatively. The aroma rises, lush, cool, almost luminous. You dab a drop on your wrist. The scent unfurls instantly, turning the air around you soft and shimmering, as if you've stepped into a memory rather than a hallway. There's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval Georgian elites made extensive use of rosewater and aromatic distillations both imported and locally produced. Physicians prescribed rosewater for anxiety and headaches. Nobles used it in baths, teas, and perfumes, and courts incorporated it into rites, celebrations, and diplomatic receptions. You follow the servant into a palace courtyard open to the sky. Moonlight pours over white stone, casting gentle shadows across carved pillars. A fountain trickles in the centre, its water lightly perfumed with, you guessed it, rosewater. Every breeze carries a cool, delicate aroma that makes your chest feel like it's swelling with gentle warmth. Several nobles lounge on cushions around low wooden tables. They wear long tunics embroidered with gold thread, their belts set with enamel medallions. At first glance, they look perfectly serious. Warriors, strategists, princes. But the soft glow in their eyes suggests they've been enjoying the palace's aromatic uplifts for a while now. One noble gestures for you to sit. He pours a steaming drink from a clay pitcher into a small cup and hands it to you. Rosewater wine, he says. Not as strong as our festival vintages, but it drifts. You take a sip. The flavour is gentle. Honey, petals, something faintly mineral from the water. It warms your throat without burning. Another noble lifts a small incense burner, letting thin blue smoke curl toward the sky. This blend calms the spirit, he explains, waving it gently toward you. The aroma is herbal, soothing, a little dreamy. A quirky tidbit. Surfaces. Some Georgian courts blended rose oil with herbs like thyme or violet to create subtle sensory shifts. Relaxed, uplifted, or meditative, depending on the mixture. Your thoughts soften, not foggy, not drifting, just slowed, like a quiet river winding through mountains. The nobles speak with relaxed clarity. They tell stories of old kings who held nighttime councils in bathhouses infused with rose and mint steam, claiming the atmosphere sharpened judgment. Historians still argue whether this was true clarity, one noble admits, lips curling, or simply the comfort of warm air and good company. You suspect both. Music begins from the far side of the courtyard. A pair of musicians pluck at panduri strings, creating a lilting, melancholy melody that seems to echo off the stone walls and linger in the air like perfume. The sound merges with the rosewater scent until it's impossible to tell where the fragrance ends and the music begins. Joke number one rises gently. Even the air here feels moisturized. You're one deep breath away from becoming a skincare commercial. A palace herbalist approaches with a basket of small clay jars. He sits beside you and opens one, releasing a scent so soft and floral you feel your shoulders loosen instantly. Rose balm, he explains. A little on the temples quiets the mind. He demonstrates by dabbing a bit on your wrist. The world exhales, you follow suit, and your thoughts settle into an even calmer hum, like the palace itself is breathing with you. Nearby, nobles begin discussing mountain fortresses, vineyard harvests, political alliances, theological debates, and the merits of different rose species. Their voices drift calmly. Nothing rushes here. Everything floats. After finishing your cup, you're invited to the palace hammam. The bathhouse glows with lamplight. Steam billows through carved alcoves carrying scents of rose, mint, and bay leaf. You sit on a warm stone bench as steam curls around you, settling in your lungs like a velvet blanket. Rosewater drips from copper spouts into basins, dispersing ripples of scent you can feel more than smell. A royal attendant pours warm water over your hands, the rose fragrance rising in delicate waves. The heart softens in the steam, she says. Even kings breathe easier when bathed in flowers. Joke number two tiptoes in. If every medieval ruler had this spa set up, half of Europe's wars could have been avoided entirely. Afterward, she hands you a cup of chilled rose sherbet, sweet, floral, cool enough to make your teeth chatter. The contrast of hot steam and cold drink sends a soft shiver through you, but the rose warmth returns quickly. You step outside again, now glowing slightly from steam and serenity. The nobles welcome you back with fresh cushions. Someone hands you a piece of church kala, walnuts dipped in grape must and hardened into a glossy treat. Its sweetness mixes beautifully with the rose lingering in your mouth. A scholar sits beside you, tracing patterns on a slate board. The scent, he tells you, opens the mind to gentle thoughts, not visions, not dreams, just softness. He smiles. Clarity of a different kind. You lean back against a cushion as the night breeze drifts through the courtyard. The rosewater in the fountain sparkles faintly. Lamps flicker. Musicians change melodies. Now something deeper, richer, but still delicate. Joke number 3 emerges softly. With this much rosewater in the air, even your intrusive thoughts are probably wearing silk robes now. The moon rises higher, turning the marble pale and luminous. The nobles continue their calm conversations. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the scent wash through you until you feel like you're floating. And as the night deepens, the rose-hazed calm gently loosens your anchor, carrying you onward, ready for whatever sweet fermented world waits just beyond the next breath. The rose-scented calm drifts from your skin like a soft exhale, fading into the cool, mountain breeze as the Georgian courtyard dissolves around you. The air warms again, slowly at first, then with unmistakable richness. A sweet, fermented aroma rolls over your senses, thick as beeswax and sunlit stone. Your steps shift from marble to packed earth. Torches flicker brighter. Somewhere nearby, laughter rings like bells dropped onto wooden tables. A cluster of terracotta jugs comes into focus, each one swollen and rounded like sleeping animals. Grapevines crawl over stone walls behind them. A new world unfolds around you, Armenia. Medieval Armenia, where kings ruled from basalt-throned citadels and honey-fermented brews were not merely drinks but cultural inheritance, sacred craft, and on long winter nights, a shortcut to warm conversation and questionable singing. Your boots crunch on gravel as you step into a courtyard enclosed by fortress walls glowing gold from fire pits. A group of nobles sits around a long table laden with roasted lamb, pomegranate seeds, fresh herbs, and rows upon rows of clay jugs sealed with wax. The sweet fermenting scent hangs in the air like a promise. A bearded noble waves you over with a grin so wide it could lift the entire citadel. "Come," he says, "you look in need of warmth." He presses a clay cup into your hand, the rim still warm from the brew inside. The drink glows amber, thick, honey-sweet, bubbling with fermented sparkle. You sip. Heat floods your chest instantly, rolling outward like a hearth fire lit under your ribs. The sweetness hits first, bold but clean, followed by a sour tang that taps your tongue like a friendly pat. You exhale. The vapour smells faintly floral and rich, like late summer orchards and wild meadows and a particularly affectionate beehive. A mainstream historical fact rises neatly. Armenia has one of the oldest wine traditions on earth, and medieval Armenian kings also enjoyed honey-based fermented drinks, types of mead and tar-like herbal tonics for feasts, ceremonies, and diplomatic negotiations. These brews varied by region, some aged underground in earthenware jars, others flavoured with herbs, fruits, or even small stones superheated in fire before being dropped into the mash to caramelise the sugars. A nearby brewer, his hands stained a permanent amber hue, pours you a second cup, this one deeper in colour. "Carved from the mountains," he says proudly. "Aged in clay. Sweet enough to make a monk dance?" You raise an eyebrow. He nods gravely. "It has happened." Nobles roar with laughter. You sip. This batch is thicker, richer, carrying notes of walnut, apricot, and something smoky. The warmth spreads through your limbs like your bones have dipped themselves in honey. The king enters the courtyard, broad-shouldered, draped in red wool embroidered with gold thread. His crown gleams with garnet inlays. He claps once, and servants rush forward bearing trays of warm flatbread, roasted vegetables, cheese, and more jugs, because apparently hydration is optional tonight. A quirky tidbit hums from memory. Some Armenian chronicles claim certain royal brews were infused with mountain herbs believed to inspire bright thoughts during council. Whether this meant enlightenment or enthusiastic rambling is unclear. As if on cue, the king raises his cup. "Truth," he announces, "is best spoken with warmth in the blood." His advisors nod solemnly, while already pouring themselves seconds. The music starts, duduk players weaving mournful, haunting melodies that curl around you like incense. The honey brew softens the sound, warming the melancholy into something strangely comforting, like the feeling of looking at old photographs by firelight. One noble leans in, speaking confidentially. Historians still argue whether these honey brews had effects. He swirls his cup. Some say they sharpen thought, others say they sharpen arguments. He grins. Both are true. You take another sip. The courtyard flickers brighter. The fire crackles louder. The stone walls rise taller. Everything feels just a little more vivid, like someone turned up the brightness on reality. Joke number 1 tiptoes in. You begin to suspect this brew has 2 settings: warm contentment and I could probably arm wrestle a bear. A shout erupts near the far end of the table. 2 nobles argue cheerfully about the best mountain pass for winter travel. Their arms flail, their faces glow, their cups refill themselves mysteriously often. Honestly, the honey might be refilling them. You nibble on warm bread dipped in herbs. The flavours bloom: tarragon, basil, mint, and the honey brew seems to amplify everything. The walls feel closer, friendlier. The torches sway gently as though dancing. A poet stands on a bench swaying slightly and recites a verse comparing honey to the laughter of the gods. People cheer. The king encourages him to keep going. The poet obliges. Maybe too much. Joke number 2 sighs into your mind. You're either hearing a magnificent ode or the longest toast in medieval history. The king's younger brother approaches you with a jug painted with pomegranate designs. This, he says, is the smoother brew. You hesitate. He grins widely. Always a sign of danger. But you take a sip. Smooth isn't the right word. It's silky, soft, deceptively mild. The warmth sneaks in rather than storms in. Your vision sharpens, not in a dramatic way, but like someone polished the moonlight. The air feels thicker, richer. You lean back, stretching your legs under the table. The warmth pools in your belly like molten amber. A scholar begins explaining the symbolism of honey in Armenian folklore: life, prosperity, divine sweetness. You nod politely, realizing halfway through his explanation that each word seems to arrive at your ears with a tiny echo. Not alarming, merely interesting. Joke number 3 lands softly. If the echo gets any friendlier, it might start contributing to the conversation. The king raises his cup again. Tonight, he proclaims, we drink to clarity. Everyone cheers. You sip. Your clarity feels pleasantly negotiable. The courtyard grows quieter as the night deepens. The fire burns low. Nobles recline against cushions, talking in soft voices. The honey warmth finally mellows, deep and soothing, like sinking into a sun-warmed pool. You stand, feeling steady but softened around the edges. The night breeze carries the scent of stone fruit, smoke, and fermenting honey. The citadel walls glimmer faintly in the moonlight. You step through an archway leading to the fortress ramparts. The mountains loom dark and ancient beyond the walls, their ridges outlined against the stars. You rest your hands on the cool stone. The honey warmth in your chest meets the mountain chill like 2 old friends. Your steps slow. Your breath eases. The world prepares, quietly, gently to shift again. Another royal indulgence waits beyond the next heartbeat. The honey-warm glow of Armenia slowly dissolves, thinning into cool air that smells of stone dust and ancient incense. The citadel walls blur into shadows, then brighten again, this time with a high sun blazing above plateaus and rugged hills. The ground beneath you shifts from gravel to sun-baked earth. A gust of dry wind whistles past your cheek, carrying notes of frankincense, myrrh, and something sharper, more resinous. You blink, and the world resolves into towering basalt columns, carved doors, and a courtyard bathed in golden light. You've arrived in medieval Ethiopia, homeland of emperors whose power radiated from highland thrones, and whose rituals leaned heavily on incense. Lots of incense. Enough incense to make your clothes smell holy for a week. You step forward into the courtyard of an imperial compound, its walls adorned with intricate crosses, its stone pathways smoothed by centuries of sandal-clad footsteps. Priests in white shawls move calmly between doorways, each holding censers that trail ribbons of fragrant smoke. It's not overwhelming, not yet. But the air carries a density, a spiritual warmth that sinks gently into your chest. A young attendant greets you, bowing with palms pressed together. The Nagusa Nagast prepares to receive guests, he says. Come, the incense will clear your thoughts. At this point, after 17 sections of clarity promises, you simply smile and follow. He leads you into a long stone hall striped with sunlight from narrow windows high above. Smoke drifts lazily along the ceiling beams. Brass incense burners line the passage, each holding a different resin. Frankincense from boswellia trees, myrrh from ancient trade routes, sandalwood that crackles softly when heated. The aromas layer onto one another, Sweet, smoky, slightly citrusy, slightly medicinal. You feel your breath deepen without consciously trying. Something in the air invites slowness. A mainstream historical fact hums in. Ethiopian royalty used incense not merely for ceremony, but for daily life, purification, diplomacy, medicine, hospitality. Certain resins were considered precious enough to be royal gifts. Others were burned in quantities that would make modern aromatherapists faint with envy. In the next chamber, nobles sit on carved wooden stools, their shawls woven from cotton as white as sunlight on water. Each holds a small clay cup of spiced coffee. Yes, coffee. You've stepped into one of the earliest coffee drinking cultures, but tonight the focus is incense. A low table at the centre holds resin lumps glistening like amber candy. A servant hands you a small piece of frankincense. Chew, he suggests, for the throat and the spirit. You hesitate, but you chew. The resin softens slowly, releasing a burst of piney sweetness mixed with bitterness. Not delicious exactly, but strangely pleasant, grounding. Warmth crawls up your throat and settles behind your eyes. Historians still argue whether chewing resin produced mild psychoactive effects, a priest remarks as he watches you acclimate. But we know it sharpens singing. He gestures toward a group of monks testing long droning chants. Their voices resonate through the hall like vibrations inside a wooden instrument. Joke number 1 glides into your thoughts. Great. Between the incense and chanting, you're about 12 seconds away from humming along without understanding a single word. An imperial herald calls for silence. The emperor enters, tall, robed in lion-coloured cloth embroidered with shimmering crosses. His crown is modest compared to European ones, but the way he carries himself makes the whole room straighten instinctively. Behind him, attendants swing large censers, releasing billowing clouds of scented smoke that drift like pale spirits through the hall. The emperor takes his seat on a carved throne. A priest stokes a burner beside him, adding, a new resin that smells deeper, almost like warm honey mixed with pepper. You inhale. The room feels softer around the edges. Your thoughts slow, not in a muddled way, but in a wide, spacious way, like there's suddenly more room inside your head. A noble leans toward you. This blend, he whispers, opens the mind and softens quarrels, very important for councils. You glance around. Everyone is indeed calmer than any political meeting you've ever seen. Even the guy who looks like he wrestles lions before breakfast seems relaxed. Servants bring trays of lightly roasted barley snacks, honey cakes, and, of course, tiny cups of coffee brewed strong enough to power a small village. The contrast between the bright coffee and the heavy incense creates a sensation you didn't expect. Alert calmness, awake serenity. You drink, you breathe, you glow a little. Joke number 2 floats in softly. If coffee is the spear and incense is the shield, your nervous system is currently negotiating a peace treaty. The emperor begins discussing matters of state, borders, trade, monastic land disputes. The incense thickens subtly. Candles flicker, voices deepen. The chants from earlier melt into a hum that vibrates through your chest, syncing with your breath. The resin you chewed leaves a warm trail in your mouth. You blink. The light seems to shimmer, not dramatically, just enough that the sunbeams look like slow, golden ribbons rather than simple shafts. You're not hallucinating, you're simply attuned. The incense has wrapped the room in a soft focus filter. A scholar near the emperor begins explaining the symbolic uses of incense, to bridge the earthly and the divine, to purify thoughts, to impress foreign envoys, to accompany coronations, funerals, blessings, even military victories. The smoke, he says, carries our intentions upward. He gestures to the drifting plumes. Some say it carries our minds as well. You watch the smoke rise and twist in beautiful patterns. One tendril looks like a lion for a moment, then like a mountain peak, then like nothing at all. You exhale. The air feels heavy but comforting, like being wrapped in a warm blanket woven from fragrance. A group of nobles begins singing softly, low, resonant harmonies that merge with the incense in your lungs. Even you feel compelled to hum under your breath. The emperor doesn't seem to notice, or maybe he appreciates the enthusiasm. Joke number 3 murmurs in, if this incense gets any more transcendent, you're going to have to declare yourself a part-time monk. Eventually the council ends. The emperor rises, dismissed nobles bow, and the incense continues to furl upward like a living tapestry. You stand slowly, feeling clarity and warmth pooled in equal measure behind your sternum. Outside, the courtyard is cooling in the late afternoon. Shadows stretch long across the ground. Priests continue to swing censers, their smoke curling into the open air where it thins into the sky. You pause beside a stone pillar, breathing deeply one last time. The scents cling to you, sweet, smoky, grounding. Even the mountains beyond the palace seem softened by the haze, their rugged peaks outlined in a gentle, dreamlike glow. And as the wind brushes past your cheek, the incense hum begins to fade, just enough to let the world tilt again, ready to carry you onward into the next royal chamber of this wandering medieval night. The incense-softened air of Ethiopia thins into a cool draught that brushes gently against your cheeks. The fragrance fades, leaving only a faint sweetness clinging to your clothes as the palace walls dissolve into shadow. The breeze grows colder, carrying hints of wild mint, wood smoke, and drying herbs hung beneath wooden eaves. When the mist clears, you're standing before a stone manor tucked into the folds of a Balkan hillside. Crenellations rising above you like jagged teeth, torchlights spilling through narrow windows, and bundles of dried plants hanging from every doorway like leafy guardians. The courtyard gate creaks open, pushed by a broad-shouldered guard whose beard has probably never met a comb. He squints at you, but his suspicion melts when he catches sight of the herb bundle tied to your belt, a souvenir from somewhere earlier in your journey that you don't quite remember picking up. He gestures for you to enter. "The Lord is in his hall," he says. "Tonight is a night for strengthening the mind." Ah, yes. Another clarity promise. You follow him across uneven stone slabs into a long hall decorated with hunting trophies, shields, furs, and herbs. So many herbs. They dangle from rafters, lie in bowls, soak in jars, and simmer in pots near the hearth. The air is thick with scent. Sage, mint, thyme, yarrow, juniper, lavender, and some aromas you can't identify but are definitely doing something to your brain. Nobles sit on benches covered in woven blankets, each holding a clay cup of steaming liquid. Some cups glow faintly green, some rust red, some the pale gold of mountain honey blended with wildflowers. You're handed a mug before you've even found a place to sit. Inside is a dark herbal brew, earthy, warm, pungent with mint and something more mysterious. You raise it to your lips. The first sip hits you like a small but friendly slap. Bitter, spicy, then mellow, then gently warming, like a hearth settling into your bones. There's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval Balkan nobility used a vast array of medicinal herbs: thyme, yarrow, juniper berry, mint, sage, wormwood, often consuming them in teas, tonics, tinctures, and poultices. Many of these herbs had real therapeutic effects. Others, well, depended on the mixture. A woman in embroidered linen leans toward you. "Mountain sage," she says, tapping your mug. "Good for clarity of thought, good for memory, good for nearly everything." She waves a hand dismissively, though some say it makes people talk too much. As if on cue, a pair of nobles nearby begin debating loudly about sheep grazing rights with the intensity of philosophers arguing metaphysics. One slams his mug down, the other waves his herb bundle like a sword. Neither seems angry, just extremely passionate, fueled by whatever botanical cocktail they're sipping. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Balkan households brewed wormwood-heavy tonics that were rumoured to bring vivid dreams or shake loose stubborn thoughts. Wormwood, as you recall, has a complicated history. Medicinal, mystical, mildly psychoactive in concentrated forms. You eye the pot simmering near the hearth a little warily. Historians still argue whether Balkan nobles intentionally sought mild psychoactive effects, a scholar says as he settles beside you, adjusting his sheepskin cloak, or whether they simply used whatever plants grew nearby and accepted the consequences. He shrugs. Hard to say. People didn't waste herbs back then. Your brew begins to settle into your senses, warming your chest, sharpening the edges of sounds around you. The crackle of the fire grows more distinct. The chatter rises and falls like waves. You smell the juniper burning in the hearth, a sharp, resinous scent that cuts through the heavier herbs, waking you up a little more. Joke number 1 flickers into your mind. If you inhaled much more juniper smoke, you'd qualify as a small batch artisanal gin. The lord of the manor enters, a towering man wearing a cloak stitched with golden thread and a belt studded with polished river stones. His presence quiets the room instantly. He takes his seat near the hearth and accepts a carved wooden cup from a servant. "What are we brewing tonight?" he asks, swirling the cup beneath his nose. "Clarity blend," replies the herbalist. "Mint for the breath, yarrow for the blood, sage for the mind, juniper for persuasion." He winks. The lord smirks. "I hope persuasion finds me in a generous mood." He drinks, then motions for you to sit closer. He studies you for a moment. Your clothes, your expression, probably the faint incense scent you still carry. Then he nods approvingly. "You look like someone who has journeyed far," he says. "Drink. These hills welcome those who respect their herbs." You sip again. The warmth intensifies. Not dizzying, not overwhelming, just deeper, fuller. The blend tastes more complex the longer it lingers on your tongue. You sense layers you didn't notice before. Subtle sweetness, cool mint, a lingering bitterness like dark roots pulled from wet earth. Joke number 2 rises gently. At this point, you're convinced every Balkan village has a PhD in accidental pharmacology. A group of musicians begins playing near the far wall, flutes, tamburas, a deep drum that thumps like a giant's heartbeat. The herbal warmth makes each note feel richer, as if the music is soaked in memory. You close your eyes for a moment. The hall seems to expand. Shadows lean in. Firelight stretches long and slow. Someone taps your shoulder. It's the herbalist again. "Would you like to try a milder blend?" he offers. "More mint, less yarrow. Good for balance." You nod gratefully. One powerful mug is enough adventure for the evening. He hands you a new cup. The steam rises cool and fresh. You breathe it in. The mint clears your head instantly, smoothing out the heavier, herbs' lingering weight. Outside, wind rattles the wooden shutters. Wolves howl in the distance, their voices echoing across the hillside. The nobles pause to listen. Not afraid, just reverent. Wolves are part of this land, as essential as herbs, mountains, and stubborn arguments. A storyteller stands and begins recounting a tale of a king who outwitted a mountain spirit by drinking a special sage brew. You're not sure whether the brew or the story is more embellished, but both captivate the room. Joke number 3 wanders into your thoughts. If every royal problem could be solved by sage tea, medieval Europe might have been noticeably calmer. The storyteller's voice deepens. Flames flicker. The herbal mixture softens your muscles, warms your fingers, steadies your breath. You feel alert but relaxed, a rare combination. Eventually the lord rises. "The night grows quiet," he says. "Let the herbs rest in our blood until morning." Servants begin clearing cups. Nobles disperse, some still arguing amicably about sheep. The herbalist bows to you once more. "Travel safely," he says, "and mind which herbs you carry with you. Some have opinions." You step outside into the crisp mountain air. Stars glitter overhead, sharp enough to cut. The scents of mint and juniper cling to your breath. Your footsteps echo softly on the stone path. The hills hum quietly. The world tilts again. One more royal indulgence awaits you before the final drift into darkness. The Balkan mountain air lingers on your skin, cool, herbal, touched with juniper as the manor fades into shadow. The stars stretch overhead, widening, thinning, until they look like scattered embers shaken from a dying fire. Your boots crunch on frost-silvered earth. Then the cold deepens, sharp, bracing, crystalline. The scent of mint becomes the bite of winter. Pines darken into silhouettes against a vast night sky. You hear the steady creak of snow beneath wood. A torch crackles, a horse snorts, and when your eyes adjust, you find yourself standing before a Norse longhouse. Its roof thick with turf, its timbers rimed with frost, its smoke hole breathing a thin column upward like a steady prayer. A guard nods for you to enter. "The king holds council tonight," he says, pulling a fur cloak tighter around his shoulders. There is warmth inside, and strength. You step through the heavy door of the longhouse, and heat rushes up to meet you. Firelight flickering against carved beams, the scent of pine pitch and animal fat mingling with something else, the grassy sweetness of fresh sprouts, the earthiness of barley mash, and the unmistakably clean, bright aroma of glacial water poured into wooden bowls. This court has its own indulgence, its own clarity enhancer, the sprout tonics and barley brews favoured by certain Viking leaders who believed fresh, living greens granted vigour in winter and spiritual insight during ritual gatherings. You see bowls filled with green, shoots, barley, rye, even wild herbs coaxed to grow indoors during long dark months. Their smell is alive, green, almost spring-like. A woman clad in embroidered wool offers you a wooden cup. Inside swirls a pale green liquid flecked with grains and crushed sprouts. It smells like earth, snowmelt, and new beginnings. Drink, she says. It strengthens the mind, good for long nights. You take a sip. The taste is surprising, slightly sweet, slightly bitter, bright with something you can't place. A warmth spreads slowly from your stomach outward, but this warmth is different from honey brew or incense or saffron. It feels clean, clear, almost electric, like a cold river running through your veins. Not intoxicating, invigorating. There's your mainstream historical fact. Vikings used sprouted grains and herbal tonics during winter, partly for nutrition, partly for symbolic renewal. Archaeological evidence shows sprouted barley mash mixed with herbs, honey, and water, a kind of proto-tonic, consumed for health, ritual, or even sharpened focus during long councils. The king sits near the central hearth, a broad man with grey-streaked hair and a presence that fills the room like a storm cloud preparing to break. He raises his own cup to you. The land sleeps now, he says, but the mind must stay awake. A storyteller seated nearby adds, "Sprouts hold the sun's promise in winter. They wake the spirit." You sip again. The tonic brightens behind your eyes, subtle but noticeable, a tightening of attention, a crispness in the air. The fire crackles louder. The carved dragon heads on the beams seem to glow. The smoke curling toward the rafters moves in lines smoother, more deliberate than you expected. Joke number 1 pads quietly into your mind. You weren't expecting medieval Scandinavia to introduce you to the world's first seasonal smoothie, but here we are. The king gestures for silence as a seer enters, wrapped in furs, carrying a bundle of herbs bound with woolen thread. She tosses the bundle onto the fire, and the smoke shifts instantly, sharper, resinous, touched with birch and angelica root. The scent mixes with the tonic warming your blood, creating a clarity so crisp you almost hear your thoughts forming. Historians still argue, the seer says, her voice low and steady, whether herbs and sprouts alone sharpen the mind, or whether belief called the clarity into being. She glances at you with a knowing smirk. Perhaps both. The warriors around you drink more of the green tonic, speaking in focused, quiet tones about raids, harvests, alliances, and omens. Their movements feel precise, deliberate, their eyes steady. No dreamy drifting here. This is grounded clarity, winter-forged and sharpened like an axe edge. A man hands you a small bowl of sprouted barley mixed with honey and crushed juniper berry. "Eat," he says. "This keeps the eyes open when the night is long." You try a spoonful. The flavours pop, piney, sweet, earthy. A fresh wave of bright alertness floods your senses. Joke number 2 arrives gently. You're now running on what feels like ancient Scandinavian pre-workout. The longhouse buzzes with energy, shields gleaming, dogs sleeping near the fire, warriors sharpening blades while humming low songs. The sprout tonic seems to align the entire room, everyone alert, steady, thoughtful, as if the tonic has synchronized their minds like a drumbeat. The king signals for the horn player. A long, deep note fills the space, resonant, almost physical. The sprout tonic's clarity makes the sound vibrate through your bones. You breathe deeply, cold air slips into your lungs and merges with the warm tonic inside you. The combination feels like stepping into sunlight after weeks of winter darkness. A warrior leans toward you. "This drink," he says, tapping his cup, "keeps despair outside the walls." He nods to the icy darkness beyond the door. Winter tests the spirit, but green things, living things, they remind us the world wakes again. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some sagas mention leaders using sprouted grain drinks during rituals for renewal or decision-making, believing sprouts symbolized rebirth strong enough to anchor judgment during the darkest months. The thought fits. The longhouse feels like the belly of something alive, warm, bright, anchored against endless winter. Joke number 3 settles softly. Honestly, if you drink much more of this stuff, you'll be ready to debate a glacier. The king rises. The night moves, he says. The world waits. Strength in the mind is strength in the realm. His voice carries weight, but also calm and something more. Clarity. You finish your tonic. The warmth hums through your fingertips, behind your eyes, along your spine. The air feels balanced, sharp but gentle. A servant opens the door to let in fresh winter air. The cold pours in, clean, bright, bracing. You step outside, wrapped in the lingering clarity of sprouted sunlight in a cup. The stars overhead glint. Snow crunches. The horizon shifts like a living ribbon of blue-white shadow. Your journey's final transformation begins, slow, soft, easing you from crisp wakefulness into something gentler. The world tilts, and the wind carries you toward the quiet closing of this long, strange, fragrant night. The snowbound world softens around you. The longhouse fades into a distant glow, its hearth now no more than a warm memory flickering behind your eyes. The crisp clarity you felt moments ago loosens gently, the way a tightly wrapped cloak slips from your shoulders when you're finally ready to rest. Your breath slows, your steps ease. Even the cold seems to soften its edges, settling into something hushed and harmless. The wind no longer bites, it brushes. The stars overhead stretch into long strands of silver, not sharp anymore, but blurred slightly, like reflections drifting across still water. The night deepens, yet it feels lighter somehow, as though the darkness has thinned into something breathable, soft, and safe. Every sound, the distant crack of ice, the whisper of snow, the hush of your own footsteps, fades into a slow, steady rhythm that wraps around you like a lullaby. You feel all the scents from your journey trail behind you, in gentler echoes now, the rosewater dimming into sweetness, the incense settling like warm sand, the herbs fading into cool mist. Even the sprout tonic's clarity melts into a calm brightness that glows rather than sparks. You find a quiet place where the snow is undisturbed, smooth as silk in moonlight. When you sit, the ground welcomes your weight without protest. The night doesn't pull you forward anymore. It holds you still, breathing with you, letting your thoughts unwind into longer and longer waves. Your eyelids grow heavier, your breath becomes deeper, the world narrows to softness and warmth and the fading echo of distant fires, and as everything settles, quiet, slow, peaceful, you let yourself drift, not forward, not backward, just gently, down,